Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto gets seduced by Kushina at war? And subscribe if you enjoy the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. It had been bleeding that way for 3 days. Purple at the edges where the smoke from the Edo Tensei corpses mixed with the residue of collapsed jutsu. Green where the cursed energy leaked. Orange where real fire had consumed real things. Naruto Uzumaki had stopped noticing it sometime around the second day. When you had been fighting for 72 consecutive hours, the sky stopped being the sky and became just another thing that might try to kill you. He was tired in a way he had never been before, and he had been tired in some legendary ways. His clones had long since collapsed. His Sage Mode reserves were cycling slower than usual. The natural energy around the battlefield disturbed by Madara's techniques into something chaotic and almost unusable. Kurama was still with him, still vast and burning and unshakably present at the center of his chest. But even the Nine Tails felt stretched, the way a flame looks when you hold it in wind. "You need to end this," Kurama said inside his head. Not a warning. A statement of fact, delivered without drama. "I know," Naruto said out loud, which looked insane to anyone watching, a 17-year-old boy talking to himself in the center of a war zone. Nobody was watching. Everyone who had been nearby was either running, dead, or smart enough to stay back. Uchiha Madara stood 30 meters away and looked like he'd stepped out of a painting of hell and found the experience refreshing. Naruto had fought a lot of strong people. He had fought Pain, who had destroyed an entire village before breakfast. He had fought the Raikage, which was less a fight and more a conversation held at lethal speed. He had fought Sasuke more times than he could count, and Sasuke had a particular genius for finding the exact right place to hit something to make it stop working. Madara was something else. Madara was what happened when genius was given eternity to become genius at itself. "You're tiring, boy," Madara said. He wasn't even breathing hard. His black armor caught the dying light and threw it back as shadow. This is the nature of things. The young are brilliant and brief, the old endure. "You literally had to come back from the dead to keep going," Naruto called back. "That's not enduring, that's cheating." A corner of Madara's mouth moved, not quite a smile. The closest thing to amusement a man like that could produce. Semantics. He raised his hand. The space around it began to fold, not metaphorically, but literally, like a piece of paper being creased by invisible fingers. The air rippled in concentric rings, and Naruto felt his chakra pathways spasm in response. The same instinctive wrongness you got near a black hole, near something that consumed rather than expelled. He recognized the technique's shape. It wasn't one of the Rinnegan's standard abilities. This was something older, something that Naruto had heard described once by Hagoromo, the Sage of Six Paths himself, with an expression that was as close to unease as an ancient god came. A space-time forbidden technique. Something that didn't just move a person through space but severed them from their moment, cut them loose from the thread of time they occupied and sent them spinning into the fabric at large. "Naruto." Kurama's voice was sharp and immediate. "Do not let that technique complete." "Yeah, I figured that out." He moved. It wasn't elegant. Elegant had been 2 days ago, when he still had full Sage Mode and multiple clones and enough chakra to do things in a way that people later wrote down as incredible. What he did now was raw, a full sprint across 30 meters of cratered earth, pulling every available scrap of his own chakra plus Kurama's contribution into his right palm, spinning it into the dense, screaming sphere of a Rasengan, not a variant, not an enhanced version. The original, his father's technique. The one that Jiraiya had spent 3 years mastering before handing it to him like a sacred inheritance. He had learned it in a week. He had understood then, even as an academy dropout 12-year-old, that there was something about this particular jutsu that lived in his blood. Madara did not dodge. He chose not to. The Rasengan connected with the center of the space-time technique in Madara's hand and the world ended. Not permanently. Just for a moment. There was a sound like every bell ever made ringing simultaneously. And then there was light. Not the yellow-white of an explosion, but something else. Something that had no business existing in the physical world. A color that Naruto did not have a word for because no human language had needed one until now. The light came from the collision of Naruto's rotating chakra against the folded space-time, and the result was not an explosion so much as an opening, a wound in time. Naruto felt it like a fist in his chest, not pain exactly, but suction, a vast and indifferent pull that had no interest in his preferences or his survival. The world tilted. His feet left the ground. He was aware, in a fragmented and increasingly unimportant way, of Madara's expression shifting from calculation to something he had probably not felt in decades, surprise. Then there was nothing. Then there was everything. Then there was ground, and Naruto hit it at speed, different dirt. This wasn't the ashy, churned-up soil of the Fourth War's Central Plains. This was red-brown earth, rocky and dry, the kind that crumbled when you grabbed it and left rust stains on your palms. He grabbed a handful on instinct, an old survival reflex from 100 training sessions with Jiraiya, who had believed that the first thing you did in any unknown environment was learn its texture. The second thing he noticed was the silence. Not real silence. There was wind, and somewhere distantly the sound of something burning, and further away a percussion that his body recognized before his brain caught up with it. Explosions. Weapons fire. The specific terrible music of a battlefield. But no voices. No one nearby. He sat up and immediately regretted it. His head was a spectacular disaster. The space-time transit, if that's what it had been, had scrambled something in his inner ear, and the world spun with an enthusiasm that suggested it wasn't done with him yet. He pressed his hands to the ground and breathed through it, the way Tsunade had taught him, slow counts of 4. "You're alive," Kurama said. The fox's presence was there, but fainter than usual, not absent, but somehow behind glass, muffled. "The transit puts stress on our connection. I need time to stabilize. Take what you need." Naruto looked around. Hills. Red-brown rock faces, sparse vegetation, the occasional scrubby tree bent sideways by wind. The sky was blue, actually blue, not the corrupted bruise of the Fourth War, with smoke columns rising in the east. 3 of them, maybe 4. The nearest was maybe 2 kilometers. He didn't recognize the landscape. Which meant he was far from any of the theaters of the Fourth War he'd been deployed to, or, the alternative occurred to him slowly, the way the worst thoughts always did. Or he wasn't in his own time. He patted himself down. Kunai pouch, intact. Flak jacket, damaged from the fight with Madara, one of the buckles blown off, but essentially wearable. His headband was gone, lost somewhere in the transit. His chakra felt wrong, available but disordered, like a deck of cards thrown in the air and not yet settled back to earth. He tried to summon a clone and got nothing. He tried to pull natural energy for Sage Mode and the attempt sent a spike of nausea through him that almost knocked him back down. Okay. No clones. No Sage Mode. Limited chakra. Unknown location. Unknown time. Just Naruto. He was used to worse. He was on his feet when he heard them. Footsteps, plural, fast, disciplined. Not fleeing. Converging. The footstep pattern of trained shinobi who had found something interesting and were approaching it tactically. He turned to see 4 figures cresting the rock face above him. IWA headbands, earth-brown flak jackets, expressions that said found one in every language. Konoha uniform, one of them said. Alone, long range or, take him. They came fast, and they were good. Naruto blocked the first one's strike with crossed forearms and immediately understood the gap. He was operating at maybe 40%, chakra scrambled, and these 4 were fresh. The second one hit him in the ribs before he fully processed the first. He went down on one knee and managed to get a kunai up in time to deflect the third strike, steel ringing against steel. The fourth one had a hand seal ready and Naruto recognized the beginning form of a Doton jutsu that was about to turn the ground under him into a cage. And he had exactly enough chakra left to do one thing. He didn't have to. Something red and enormous exploded into the formation from the left side. Not literally red, red-haired. A girl, moving at an astonishing speed, with chains of crackling energy extending from her wrists, and winding around 2 of the IWA Nin before they fully registered she was there. The chains, he recognized them, his brain white-hot with recognition, Uzumaki chains. He'd seen them in scrolls but never in person, slammed the 2 captured Nin into each other, and then into the rock face with an impact that left craters. The third Nin wheeled on her. She was already inside his guard, an elbow to the throat, a knee to the ribs, A precise takedown that used his own momentum against him. He hit the ground and didn't get back up. The fourth, the one who'd been building the Doton Jutsu, saw 3 of his companions eliminated in approximately 3 seconds, and made the extremely sensible decision to run. She let him go. She turned and looked at Naruto. His brain, which had been providing useful real-time commentary throughout the fight, went completely silent. She was his age, 17, maybe 18. Medium height with a compact, powerful build and the posture of someone who'd been told all their life that they took up too much space and had decided to take up more. Violet eyes, strikingly vivid, currently arranged in an expression of supreme irritation. Her hair was a deep, saturated red, the shade of autumn maples at full peak, and it was tied back in a messy ponytail that had mostly escaped during the fight. She was wearing a Konoha headband on her forehead, and a flak jacket that had seen better years. She was the most familiar stranger he had ever seen. "You're welcome," she said. He stopped. His voice had abandoned him. "Can you walk?" The question was practical, not kind. She was already looking past him at the hills, scanning for more IWA the way a person did when they were used to more showing up. One of the downed IWA shinobi groaned and she glanced at him once, assessed, looked away, unconscious, not dead, not immediate problem. "Yeah," Naruto managed. "I can walk." "Good." She turned and started moving south along the base of the rock face, assuming he would follow. "Because I'm not carrying you, and this patrol route is compromised. We have maybe 8 minutes before their backup comes looking." He followed her, because he didn't have a better option. Because she just saved his life. Because he needed information and she clearly had it. And because some part of him, some deep Uzumaki blood part of him, felt like he had found something he hadn't known was lost. She led him through a series of narrow gullies that she navigated by memory, moving with the confidence of someone who had mapped this terrain on foot and under fire. Naruto kept pace, which seemed to mildly surprise her. She'd pegged him as more damaged than he was. He was running a constant mental triage. Everything he could observe. Everything he could learn. The landscape was the land of earth. He was almost certain. The vegetation was wrong for the land of fire or the land of water, and the rock formations matched descriptions he'd read in a geography scroll during a mission prep he'd mostly slept through but apparently retained. Land of Earth meant IWA. IWA meant the Third Shinobi World War. Which meant, if the transit had done what he thought it had done, he was at least 15 years in the past. She ducked through a crack in a rock face and he followed, emerging into a narrow hidden pocket of space. Not quite a cave, more like a scar in the stone, maybe 3 meters wide and 6 long, sheltered from above by an overhang. There was a pack here, partially unpacked. A medic kit. A scroll case. A water canteen with the Konoha leaf emblem scratched lightly into the metal. Someone's shelter. Hers, by the way. She went directly to the pack and started pulling things out. "Sit," she said. He sat on a flat rock. She came and crouched in front of him without ceremony, prying back his flak jacket to check the ribs where he'd taken the hit. Her hands were efficient and completely impersonal. Cracked, maybe? Not broken. She pressed 2 fingers to a point on his side and he hissed involuntarily. One of those. Cracked. Thought so. She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly for the first time since they'd moved, the full weight of her attention, which was considerable. "Who are you?" The question he'd been dreading and preparing for. "Uzumaki," he said. Which was true. "Naruto." Also true. "I was cut off from my squad 3 days ago." Lie. But the kind of lie that required no elaborate structure. Simple. Plausible. Something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. "Uzumaki," she repeated. "Yeah." She studied him for another long moment. He made himself hold still under it, meet her eyes without flinching, which was harder than it should have been. "I'm Uzumaki too," she said. Kushina. He already knew. He had known from the moment he saw her face. He had known from the shape of her chakra, which he'd felt during the fight. It was a frequency he recognized, a signature his own chakra had literally been built from. But hearing her say her name was different. Hearing her say her name out loud, in person, in a voice that was absolutely nothing like he'd imagined. Sharper, lower, more impatient, in the middle of an alien rock formation 15 years before he was born, while she pressed antiseptic ointment onto his cracked ribs with the bedside manner of a carpenter. That was different. He breathed through it. He was 17 years old and he had faced the Nine-Tails demon fox, multiple S-rank missing Neen, and a man who had come back from the dead to destroy the world. He could handle one conversation. "Where are you from?" she asked. Still applying ointment. Still not looking at him. "Yuzu no Kuni. Originally." Another truth, technically. She paused. Just briefly, barely a hesitation, but he caught it, the way her hands stilled for half a second before continuing. "There's nothing left of Yuzu no Kuni," she said. Flat. Not cruel. Just flat, the way people said things they processed completely and moved all the sharp edges off. "I know." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. "How old are you?" 17. Her eyes did a quick calculation. "You were a child when it fell." "I don't remember it." True. He had never been there. "I was raised somewhere else. I only know I'm from there because I was told." She accepted this. Set aside the ointment and tore a length of bandaging from the roll with practiced efficiency, gesturing for him to lift his arms so she could wrap it. He complied. "You fight well," she said. The closest she would get, he suspected, to a compliment. "You were holding back." He hadn't thought it showed. "So were you." A beat. Then something happened at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "There and gone." "I wasn't," she said. "That was my normal speed." He believed her. She finished wrapping and sat back, rolling the bandage closed with her palm. The little shelter around them was quiet. From somewhere in the middle distance came the muffled bass of another explosion, far enough away to ignore, close enough to remember. "There's a forward base 4 hours south," she said. "I was on my way back when I found you getting outnumbered. The patrol was with, got scattered. I'm the only one who knows the route, so..." She shrugged. "You can come with me or you can go wherever you were going." He had nowhere to go. He had no plan beyond survive and figure this out. And she was her, and he couldn't. "I'll come with you," he said. She nodded once, already repacking her kit. "Don't slow me down." "I won't." She shouldered her pack and moved toward the crack in the rock. At the edge of it, she paused and looked back at him over her shoulder. Violet eyes in the late afternoon shadow, red hair falling loose around her jaw. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said, as if testing how the name sat. "Strange name." "My mother chose it," he said before he could stop himself. Kushina, 17 years old, 2 years away from becoming the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. 15 years away from the night she would give her life for her son, tilted her head slightly to one side. "Must have been an interesting woman," she said. He swallowed. "She was the most incredible person I've ever known." Something in his voice made her look at him a moment longer than she needed to. Then she turned and slipped through the crack in the rock, and after a breath, he followed her. Outside, the sky was beginning to shade toward evening, real blue turning to real gold, the kind of sky that existed before a war ruined it. The smoke columns in the east were thinning. The percussion of distant battle had quieted to an irregular murmur. Naruto fell into step behind Kushina Uzumaki and thought, "I am in so much trouble." And somewhere behind glass, warm and vast and shaking with something that might have been laughter, Kurama said nothing at all. She set a pace that was fast enough to cover ground and controlled enough to preserve reserves. The pace of someone who learned the long way that burning everything in the first hour meant nothing left for the ambush in the fourth. He matched it without comment. She noticed without saying so. The terrain shifted as the sun dropped, the rock and scrub of the Badlands giving way to something slightly more forgiving, low hills covered in dry grass that whispered against their legs as they moved through it. She navigated by landmarks he couldn't see, a particular rock formation, the angle of a dry streambed, the way the wind shifted at the crest of a hill. This was someone who knew this ground down to its skeleton. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, when the silence had stretched long enough that breaking it wouldn't seem strange. 6 weeks, she said, not looking at him. Eyes on the next hill. "Our squad was assigned to disrupt Iwa's supply lines in this sector. It went fine for the first 4 weeks. And the last 2? Less fine." He waited. She was the kind of person, he could already tell, who didn't elaborate unless she decided to. Lost 2 people, she said eventually. Then the patrol patterns changed and we were operating blind. Then the scatter mission this morning. A pause. War is mostly things going less fine than you planned. Yeah, he said. She glanced at him sideways. A quick flash of violet. Assessing. You sound like you know. I do. She accepted this. They crested a hill and she paused, scanning the valley below. He did the same. No movement, no unnatural heat signatures from chakra, no reflection off metal. Clean. We'll stop here tonight, she said. Moving after dark in this sector is too risky. The IWA boundary patrols use Earth techniques that don't need light. She made camp with the economy of someone who'd done it hundreds of times. Bedroll out of the pack. A tiny fire no larger than 2 fists, situated in a declivity that would disperse the light and smoke before it crested the hillside. She pulled rations from the pack and handed him one without asking. He took it without asking either. They sat on opposite sides of the small fire. The night was cold. The high desert got cold fast, the heat of the day bleeding out through the thin air the moment the sun dropped. He ate the ration, which tasted like seasoned cardboard in the way all field rations tasted like seasoned cardboard, and watched the fire instead of her. How did you get separated from your squad? She asked. The question he'd been waiting for and had an answer to. Ambush. We were moving through a ravine system and they hit us from both sides. I got swept downstream in a flash flood they used as cover. He delivered it steadily. Plausible. Not too much detail. She nodded slowly. Not entirely convinced, he thought. She was too perceptive for easy lies, but willing to accept the framework for now. You're a long way from any ravine system. I walked. For 3 days. I wanted to be sure I wasn't circling back into their patrol zone. She looked at him across the fire. In the low orange light, her eyes were darker, more wine than violet, deep and steady. He felt the weight of the look like a physical thing. This was a girl who had grown up as an outsider, as a Jinchuriki in waiting, as the last of something. And people who grew up like that developed a particular kind of perception, the kind that lived in the space between what someone said and what they meant. You're a bad liar, she said. I've been told. Not terrible. Just bad. He almost smiled. What gave me away? You looked at the fire when you said flash flood. People who are remembering something real don't look at things. They go inside. He filed that away. What does it matter? I'm here. You don't have to trust me if you don't want to. I don't trust you, she said simply. But I don't need to trust you to bring you to base. You're Uzumaki. You have a Konoha uniform. You fight IWA Nin, not with them. She settled back, pulling her knees up to her chest. That's enough for now. And later? She considered this seriously, which he found he appreciated. She didn't dismiss the question or deflect it. I'll decide later based on later information. That's how it works, he nodded. That was how it worked. Fair. The fire crackled between them. An ember popped and spiraled up, and he watched it climb until it went out against the dark. Uzumaki Naruto, she said quietly, almost to herself. Testing it again. Yeah, the name Naruto. It's the spiral pattern inside a fish cake. Did you know that? Yeah, actually. He'd looked it up once, embarrassed by the answer, then decided he liked it. My father chose the reading. He liked spiral patterns. She was quiet for a moment. My mother said Uzumaki means spiral too. The clan symbol. She touched the cloth at her shoulder absently, the Uzumaki swirl. Everything we are comes back to that shape. Maybe that's why we end up in the middle of things, he said. Spirals. You always end up at the center eventually. She looked at him. Something in his tone had carried more weight than he'd intended. More knowing. More grief. You're strange, she said. But she said it without judgment. Almost with curiosity. I've heard that too. I like strange, she said, and turned to look at the fire, which meant she didn't see the way the words hit him, like a very small earthquake localized entirely in his chest. Most people who come out to sectors like this are either boring or dead. Strange at least lasts longer. He thought, I don't know how long I last. I don't know anything about what happens to me here or how this ends or what I'm supposed to do, he thought. she is sitting 3 meters away and she is so alive and so much herself that it hurts to look at. He thought, I am so sorry for everything you're going to carry. I'm so sorry I can't tell you. I'm so sorry I can't stop it. He thought, you are the bravest person I have ever known and you haven't even done most of the brave things yet. Out loud, he said, strange tends to be more interesting anyway. She snorted, a short, entirely unself-conscious sound. Go to sleep, Uzumaki. We move at first light. He lay back, pulled his flak jacket tighter against the cold, and looked up at the stars. They were brilliant out here, away from every light that human hands had made. He found the cluster he'd used for navigation before and counted them out of habit. From across the fire, Kushina's breathing was already settling toward sleep. She was the kind of person who could fall asleep in 10 minutes anywhere, he realized. It was a gift. He was usually the kind of person who stared at the ceiling for an hour. But tonight, the exhaustion was absolute and honest, and the cold and the stars and the familiar-unfamiliar rhythm of her breathing pulled him under before he could argue. He dreamed of red hair and ocean, of a place he'd never been, a home that no longer existed, the sound of waves against the walls of a country that burned before he was born. When he woke at dawn, his first thought was the date. His second thought was how wrong this all was. His third thought, reflexive, immediate, already unstoppable, was, where is she? She was already up, the fire out, the pack on her back, watching him with her arms folded across her chest. 30 seconds slower than I expected, she said. I was calculating, whatever helps. She turned south. Come on. He got up and followed her into the pale early light, and the hills were the same red-brown around them, and the sky was the same impossible blue, and somewhere in the east the war was waking up again. Naruto Uzumaki, 17 years old, 6 weeks from his own birth and 15 years from his own birth, depending on how you counted, walked into the wrong war after the right girl, and said nothing, and didn't look at the sky. He was going to make this work. He had no idea how. He was going to make it work anyway. It had been 4 hours of walking, plus another 2 of detour, plus 45 minutes crouched in a drainage ditch while an IWA patrol passed close enough that Naruto could hear one of them complaining about his boots. They were now, by his estimate, approximately as far from the forward base as they had been at dawn, just in a different direction. Don't, Kushina said. He hadn't said anything. You were about to say something, she clarified, not looking at him. She was scanning the ridgeline above them, one hand resting on the hilt of her kunai with the relaxed readiness of someone who'd done this so long the weapon was just another part of her hand. I can tell by the way you breathe. I breathe differently when I'm about to say something. You slow down. Like you're loading the words before you fire them. She dropped her eyes from the ridge, satisfied with whatever she'd seen or hadn't seen. Go ahead. You said 4 hours? I said 4 hours on the planned route. The planned route, that is. Compromised, yes. I know. I planned it. She moved out of the ditch with a quick, economical motion and he followed. They were moving through a narrow channel between 2 dry hillsides, shadow-striped and smelling of dust and old smoke. The eastern corridor was cleaned 3 days ago. Either there was a significant IWA repositioning overnight, or someone talked. Her voice stayed flat on that last possibility, but something in her jaw did a small, tightening thing. Either way, we adapt. How many alternate routes do you have? She was quiet for a moment. I'm building one. He absorbed this. You don't have a backup. I have principles of navigation and a working knowledge of this terrain. That's better than a backup. She ducked under a low-hanging branch of a scraggly, wind-blown pine. Backups are just routes someone else planned. I'd rather build my own. He thought about this. It struck him, at a slight remove, as one of the most Kushina things anyone could possibly say. He had spent enough time reading her mission debriefs in the archives, the Hokage Tower's records, which he'd gone through after the war with a kind of hungry grief he hadn't fully admitted to anyone, to recognize the texture of her tactical thinking. She had always navigated by principle and instinct rather than procedure. Her commanding officers had found it maddening. Her results had made the maddening worthwhile. Okay, he said. Where's the principal pointing us now? Another beat. Then, with the air of someone deciding to grant a concession, west along this channel until it opens into the lower valley. The valley has 3 possible exits south. The IWA patrol we avoided is moving northeast. They're not doubling back into the valley. So we have a window. How long a window? Long enough, if we move. They moved. He had been a shinobi since he was 12 and a serious one since he was about 14. And he had worked with a lot of different partners over the years. Sakura, who was meticulous and ferocious. Sasuke, who was brilliant and maddening in equal measure. Kakashi, who communicated more in silences than most people managed with full sentences. He had been on missions with strangers, with enemies who temporarily weren't, with people he didn't like and people he liked too much. He had never worked with anyone quite like her. It wasn't the skill, though the skill was extraordinary. It wasn't the Uzumaki chains, which she deployed with a casual efficiency that belied how rare and demanding the technique was. It was something more fundamental, the way she inhabited a battlefield. Most shinobi, however talented, operated with some layer of self-consciousness, some monitoring of how they appeared, how they were performing, whether the risk they were taking was calibrated correctly. Kushina had none of that. She moved through hostile terrain like she owned it, and the IWA shinobi were merely inconvenient guests. "You're staring," she said, without breaking stride. "I'm observing." Same thing, different word. "I'm trying to figure out your tactical pattern." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "I don't have one. Everyone has one. Not me." She hopped a narrow creek with one easy stride. He followed. "Patterns are predictable. Patterns get people killed. I do whatever makes sense in the moment. That's still a pattern. The pattern is do whatever makes sense." She stopped and turned to face him fully, which she hadn't done since they started moving, and the directness of it was slightly startling. "Are you arguing with me about how I fight?" she said. "I'm observing that, while we are in enemy territory. While we are actively trying not to die." He held up his hands. "You're right. I'll save it for later." She studied him for a moment, that flat, assessing look she gave things she hadn't categorized yet. Then she turned and started moving again. "You sound like a teacher," she said. "Not in a bad way. Just, you have this habit of explaining things." A pause. "Like you're used to being listened to." That startled him more than the confrontation had. "I'm not really." "You are. You don't notice it, which means it's natural." She navigated around a boulder. "Where did you train?" And there it was, the first real needle point. He needed an answer that was specific enough to be credible and vague enough not to be checkable. "Independent study mostly. I had a sensei for a while. He traveled a lot. We moved around. True in its bones, if not its specifics. Jiraiya had certainly traveled. They had certainly moved around. A jonin? He had the rank." She seemed to accept this. They were entering the lower valley now. It opened out ahead of them, wider and flatter than the channel, with long grass that would give cover to anyone lying in it. She slowed and went into a crouch, and he matched the movement immediately, scanning. Clear. Or apparently clear. She was quiet for 30 seconds, reading something he couldn't see. The way the grass moved, maybe, or the absence of bird sounds. Whatever she was reading satisfied her. "South exit, right side," she said quietly. "There's a natural ramp through the rock there. It's not visible from the valley floor, but I found it on my second week. Nobody else knows about it." He looked where she indicated. He couldn't see the ramp. He would find it when they got there. "Okay," he said. "Don't tell anyone at the base." "It's mine," he almost smiled. "A secret exit. A contingency." She started moving, low and fast through the long grass, and he followed, staying just far enough behind to not crowd her field of movement. In this job, private contingencies are the only things that are actually yours. He thought of the one move he'd always kept back in fights. Not the Rasengan, not the wind techniques, not the tailed beast mode. Just a particular feint he'd invented at 13 in the training fields. That he'd never shown anyone, that he still used sometimes when he needed a half second he hadn't been given. His private contingency. "Yeah," he said. "I get that." She glanced at him. Something almost imperceptible shifted in her expression, a slight softening around the eyes, there and gone. She looked forward again. She didn't say anything, but the quality of the silence between them changed, almost infinitesimally, just a degree warmer. They found a defensible shelter in the rock ramp halfway up the South Valley wall, a wide ledge with a natural overhang, hidden from below by an outcropping and shielded from above by the ramp's angle. Kushina pulled rations from her pack with the efficiency of someone calculating calories rather than considering taste. "We'll be a day late reaching the base," she said. It wasn't an apology, just an acknowledgement of arithmetic. "I'll file a report when we arrive." "Will that be a problem?" She shrugged. "Sensei will give me a look. The commander will want a full debrief." "It'll be fine." She bit into her field ration bar and made no expression about the taste, which told him she'd been eating them long enough to have opinions only in extreme circumstances. "Late is better than not arriving. Who's your sensei?" He kept his voice casual. She looked at him sideways. "Why?" "Curiosity." "You're good. I want to know who trained you." A pause. Then, with a slight shift in her jaw that he was beginning to recognize as something approaching, not pride exactly, but acknowledgement, "Noera. Rin's not my sensei, she's my teammate. My actual sensei is Namike's Minato." She said the name with a specific weight to it, not reverence exactly, but close. "You'll meet him at the base." The name hit him like cold water every time. He kept his reaction off his face by absolute force of will. "I've heard the name," he said, which was perhaps the understatement of all 3 Shinobi World Wars. "Everyone's heard the name," she said, with a tone that managed to be simultaneously proud and mildly exasperated. She stopped. "Seemed to decide something. He's the best tactician I've ever seen. He can read a battle like a piece of text and see 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still parsing the first line. It's irritating sometimes. A beat. I say that with respect." "With a lot of respect," Naruto observed. She gave him a sharp look. He met it with the blankiest expression he owned. She held the look for a moment, then returned to her ration. "He's my commanding officer and my sensei," she said. "That's what I mean." "Of course," he said. Another look. He continued to look innocent. She continued to look suspicious. They arrived at an unspoken agreement to leave it there. "What's the general situation here?" he asked, after a moment. "The sector, I mean. I've been out of communication. I don't know what we're actually pushing for." She was quiet for a beat, the professional's instinct to evaluate what level of detail was appropriate to share with an unknown quantity. He could see her working it out. He waited. "IWA has 3 main supply arteries running through this sector," she said, deciding he could have the framework. "Our mission was to disrupt the westernmost one, their secondary food and medical supply line. If they can't sustain casualties in the Western Theater, they have to pull back their forward companies. Pull back far enough and the Konoha Eastern Offensive gets breathing room." She paused. "We succeeded mostly. The line is disrupted. But the cost was," another pause, "higher than projected." The pause around higher than projected carried weight. Real weight. He didn't push it. 2 people, he said instead. "The ones you mentioned." She didn't answer immediately. The shelter was quiet, the valley below empty, the sky above deepening toward the orange of late afternoon. "Wataru was on his first long-range mission," she said finally. "He was 17. He wanted to be a medic eventually. He kept very organized notes." A beat. Hisami was older. She'd been on the front for 2 years. She was funny. Very dry. You'd never know she was joking unless you watched her eyes. Another beat. "They both died in the same ambush, 3 hours apart, but the same ambush." He said nothing. He'd learned, through considerable and painful experience, that the right response to that kind of information was nothing. "War is simple arithmetic," Kushina said. "You put people in and the war subtracts them." She said it with a flatness that he recognized, the flatness of someone who had decided to understand a thing mechanically because understanding it emotionally would not leave enough room for functioning. "I've gotten better at the math. I don't like it, but I'm better at it." "You're not supposed to like it." "No." She looked at her hands. "But sometimes the people who are best at war are the ones who start to. That worries me more than anything else." He thought of Madara. He thought of Orochimaru. He thought of people who had started as shinobi and arrived somewhere that no longer resembled anything human. "Then you're okay," he said. The worrying means you haven't crossed that line. She looked at him. The light was going amber now, coming in at a low angle under the overhang, and it caught the red of her hair and made it deeper. You say things like that, she said, like you're certain? I am certain. You don't know me. I know that. She shook her head, not dismissing him, more like dislodging the conversation from some angle it was sitting at wrong. You're strange, she said again, but this time it sounded less like an observation and more like she was reminding herself. That night he took first watch, which she allowed after testing him with a question she presented as idle. What do you do if you see a chakra signature at 300 meters, on the move, southeast bearing? He'd answered immediately and correctly. Identify, don't engage, wake the sleeping teammate first, then evaluate. She'd nodded once and gone to sleep. He sat with his back to the rock wall, and watched the valley below, and tried to think clearly. He was 15 years in the past. He had no connection to the Sage of Six Paths. Kurama was stabilizing but not yet at full capacity for communication, let alone chakra contributions. He had no clones. He had limited chakra reserves, not dangerously low, but he'd need to be careful. He couldn't use the signature techniques, the massive Raisin Shuriken, the tailed beast mode, without drawing attention he couldn't afford. He needed to survive, which was achievable. He needed to avoid changing history, which was significantly harder. The problem was that the space-time transit had not, as far as he could tell, sent him to some parallel timeline. Everything he'd seen so far, the terrain, the faces of the IWA, Kushina herself, matched the histories he knew. He was in his history. His past. The very ground that his present had grown from. Every significant choice he made had the potential to alter something. The problem with that was that he was already here. He had already interacted with Kushina. He had already fought IWA. He had already eaten one of her field rations. The disturbance was already in the water. The question was no longer whether he would affect things but how much, and in what direction. He could, theoretically, cause enormous damage. If he told the wrong person the wrong thing, if he revealed strategic information from the future, if he prevented the wrong death, if he changed the outcome of a key engagement, the ripple effects could spiral in ways he literally could not calculate. He could also, theoretically, be useful. He knew how this war ended. He knew which moves the IWA command would make in the broad strokes. He knew which shinobi survived and which didn't. He knew Minato survived. He knew Kushina survived this war. He knew she had roughly 3 more years before everything. He pressed that thought down firmly. He was not going to think about that right now. He was not going to think about it at all if he could help it. The practical reality was, he was here, he couldn't get back on his own, and until either Kurama stabilized enough to help him figure out the space-time mathematics of the transit, or some other opportunity presented itself, he was a Konoha shinobi in the Third War, and he needed to act accordingly. Which meant not accidentally revolutionizing the tactical situation, which meant not telling anyone anything useful about the future, which meant being very, very careful about what he did with his techniques. He had already used a Rasengan. That was, probably okay. Minato had already invented it, it existed in this timeline. The specific variant he'd used was different from the standard Rasengan, but not dramatically enough to be unrecognizable. Kushina had noticed something was off, but she hadn't had a reference point to hang the observation on. He needed to be more careful. Less natural. More deliberate about editing himself. He exhaled slowly through his nose. The valley was empty and dark and quiet. Behind him, Kushina was asleep. He could tell by the rhythm of her breathing. She slept deeply and without apparent movement, which didn't surprise him at all. She was the kind of person who decided to do a thing completely. He had maybe 3 days before they reached the base, given the detour and the need to stay cautious. 3 days in which he needed to present as a credible, unremarkable Uzumaki survivor without saying anything that revealed he knew things he shouldn't know, felt things he shouldn't feel, or carried grief that had no business existing yet. 3 days during which he would be walking alongside the woman who had died to give him life, who had loved him before he had a face, who was currently 17 years old and sleeping 4 feet away and completely unaware that any of this was happening. This, Kurama said from somewhere behind the glass, clearer now, the stabilization continuing, is going to be a problem. I know, Naruto said under his breath. You should know, the fox continued, with the particular relish Kurama brought to observations that were correct and unwelcome, that she smells like you. He closed his eyes. Don't. Objectively. The chakra signature. The Uzumaki resonance. She smells like a root, and you smell like what grew from it. It's simply, Kurama. I'm just noting it for the record. Record noted. Stop. A sensation like something vast and orange turning over in sleep, settling. But with amusement threaded through it. He opened his eyes and looked at the stars and tried very hard to think about tactics. The route they built. Because it became they somewhere in the second day. Their navigation becoming a kind of conversation without words, each adjusting to the other's assessments and incorporating the result. Wound through territory that no sane commanding officer would have chosen as a path. Dry riverbeds and shale slopes and a particularly memorable crossing of a ridge so narrow that the wind came at them sideways, and Kushina said, without looking at him, "Don't fall," and he said, also without looking at her, "You don't fall," and they crossed without incident. 4 days in which Naruto learned the shape of her, not the version of her he'd assembled from documents and stories and the things people said with careful reverence when they talked about the 4th Hokage's wife. That version was a person he had constructed from breadcrumbs, from the letters she'd written him that he hadn't read until he was 16, from the photograph in the Hokage archive, from Kakashi's brief and visibly painful memories, from the stories that Jiraiya had told in the way people tell stories about sacred things, obliquely, looking slightly sideways. The version in front of him was made of something else, entirely. She was loud when she was annoyed, which was frequently, not loud as in volume, though she had volume when she wanted it, but loud in the way she occupied space, the way her irritation filled the room like weather. She was also, he discovered, intermittently and unexpectedly funny. Not joke funny. Observation funny. A dry commentary on the world delivered with perfect timing and then dropped, as if she'd lost interest in whether anyone laughed. He always laughed. She cooked badly but enthusiastically. On the 3rd evening, when they'd found a safer campsite with a water source and she'd produced what she described as actual food from the deeper recesses of her pack. Dried meat, some kind of preserved vegetable, a sachet of broth powder, she'd combined these with the confidence of someone who either didn't know or didn't care that the combination was objectively strange. It tasted fine. He ate all of it. She looked satisfied. She had a habit, when she was thinking, of pressing her thumb and forefinger together repeatedly. A small, rhythmic motion, like she was testing the texture of something invisible. She didn't seem aware of it. She woke up entirely. No groggy half-present period. No slow assembly of consciousness. She opened her eyes and she was awake and moving, which was slightly uncanny but also, he thought, very efficient. She didn't talk much about herself, but she asked questions constantly. Not personal questions, mostly tactical and professional. What's the standard Uzumaki ceiling approach in your training? What's your range on thrown weapons? Have you worked with any sensor types? The questions were genuine. She was assembling a picture of what he could do, what he could be relied on for, where his gaps were. He answered honestly where he could and carefully where he couldn't. She also had a tell when she caught him being too careful, a slight narrowing of the left eye, a quarter second, gone before you notice it if you weren't watching for it. He was always watching for it. You were with Iwanine before I found you, she said on the 3rd day, apparently returning to a thread she'd left untouched for 48 hours. They were navigating a section of old forest, scraggly and windblown, the trees no wider than his arm. But they broke the sight lines and that was what mattered. Being ambushed by Iwanine, yes, he said. You were outnumbered 4-1. You were blocking and deflecting, not attacking. She stepped over a root with precision. That suggests you were choosing not to escalate. I was conserving energy. Or you were waiting for me. I didn't know you existed, he said. Which was true, in every applicable sense. She was quiet for a moment. The technique he used in the fight. The spinning chakra ball. He'd been waiting for this. My sensei's technique, he said. He developed it. I learned from him. I've never seen it before. It's not widely known. She accepted this, but just barely. He could feel it sitting in her, unresolved. It works on rotation, she said. Compressed chakra, spinning at a high enough rate to generate its own cutting edge. The delivery is contact range. She paused. It's elegant. Most powerful contact techniques sacrifice some of that. The compression makes it efficient. She had understood the basic mechanics of the Rasengan from one visual observation in a combat situation. He thought, not for the first time, that she was frighteningly sharp. Your sensei must be good, she said. He was exceptional, Naruto said. She caught the past tense. He saw her catch it, that quarter-second left eye narrowing. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. He meant it differently than it sounded. He lived a full life. He died his own way. He thought of Jiraiya on the water, alone, stubbornly, perfectly himself. That's the best any of us can ask for. She was quiet for a long moment. That's either very wise or very practiced, she said. Bit of both. She made a sound in her throat, not quite a laugh. Not quite, not one. They were stopped at noon in the shade of an overhang, genuinely stopped, resting, because even Kushina had limits, and 4 days of this terrain had reached them, when she pulled from the inner pocket of her jacket a small, folded piece of paper. Not a map. He recognized it by the way she held it, the specific tension of something personal. She opened it and read it, and he looked away. He understood that this wasn't for him, but he caught, in his peripheral vision, the way her face did something while she read. The armor she wore came down, just slightly, not fully, not to anything vulnerable, but the constant efficiency relaxed. Just for a moment, something sad and young moved across her features. She folded it back up. Put it back in the inner pocket, which required reaching under the flak jacket. Closed everything up again. She looked at the middle distance. He looked at the same middle distance. From home? He said quietly. A pause. What's left of it? He waited. There's a woman in Konoha, she said, after a while. She took me in when I was young. When I came from Uzushio. She said it lightly. When I came from Uzushio, not when Uzushio burned, not when I was the only one, just when I came. She writes every month, whether there's anything to say or not. She sent this with the last supply rotation. She sounds like a good person. She's a remarkable person. Kushina leaned her head back against the rock. She's not warm. She doesn't hug you or make food or sit with you when things are hard. She's a very brisk, organized woman who is always slightly disappointed by entropy. But she found a place for me when I needed one, and she has never once looked at me like I'm something to be managed. A beat. That sounds like a small thing. It's not a small thing, Naruto said. She looked at him. No, she said. It isn't. He thought about Iruka-sensei, who had been the first adult to look at him like a person. He thought about old man Hokage, who had done his best with deeply imperfect tools. He thought about Kakashi, who had looked away first, and then looked back and kept looking. He understood, down to the marrow, that it was not a small thing. Were you alone before? Kushina asked. When you were young. He considered how to answer this. Yes and no, he said. I had people. They were just, he paused. They were around the edges. I was the only one in the middle. She nodded slowly. Like she knew exactly the topology of that sentence. Yes and no, she said. That's exactly right. She turned her face back to the middle distance. Uzumaki children who grow up outside Uzushio mostly have that. We're too strange for normal and not strange enough for special. We end up in the middle of things nobody planned. He thought of himself at 6, at 8, at 12, all the years of exactly that. Until you're not, he said. Until you're not, she agreed. They sat in the shade of the overhang while the afternoon moved over them. Either of them spoke. It was the most comfortable silence he'd spent in 4 days. Maybe the most comfortable silence he'd spent in years. It was the silence of people who had found the same frequency without having to look for it. He was careful not to look at her for too long. He wasn't always successful. The forward base appeared on the 4th afternoon as a collection of structures that someone had clearly assembled under extreme duress. Prefabricated walls, earthworks thrown up by Doton users, camouflage netting over everything with the determined energy of people who knew they were visible, and were covering anyway out of principle. It was positioned in a natural depression in the hills, surrounded on 3 sides by defensible rock formations. Home, Kushina said. She didn't say it warmly. She said it like a navigator saying landmark confirmed. They were still a quarter mile out when a sentry challenged them, and then a second sentry, and then an ANBU operative sliding out of the rock face in the way ANBU did that never stopped being deeply unnerving no matter how many times you'd seen it. Kushina cleared it with her identification marker and a brief, crisp statement of their names and mission. The ANBU looked at Naruto for a long time. Naruto looked back without expression. Unknown, the ANBU said, not unknown. Uzumaki Naruto, separated from his unit on the Western Ridge 6 days ago. Uzumaki clan, land of waves origin. She recited his cover story without reference to him, without hesitation, as if she'd memorized it and decided to believe it. The effect was of someone presenting evidence they considered settled. The ANBU looked at him for another moment. He'll need processing. Obviously, Kushina said. Can we go in now? They went in. The base was cramped and busy, shinobi moving between structures with the purpose of people who had too much to do, supply handlers cataloging what had arrived, a medic arguing with someone about something at the entrance to what was probably the medical tent. It smelled of chakra residue and machine oil and food that had been reheated too many times. It was also, in a way that surprised him, alive. People called to each other across the camp. Someone was laughing near the mess tent, a real laugh. The kind you heard when someone had actually said something funny. Two shinobi he didn't recognize were playing some kind of card game against the supply crate. Wars were like that. He'd known it in his own time but kept being surprised by it. The way human beings found the cracks in catastrophe and grew things in them. Kushina was already moving toward the command structure. She stopped once to speak briefly to a chunin who'd clearly been waiting for her, took something from him, a folded brief, by the look of it, and kept moving. She had transitioned, in the space of about 30 seconds, from the person he'd been traveling with into someone in an entirely different register, efficient, purposeful, shedding the intimacy of the road like a jacket she didn't need indoors. He understood this too. A hand touched his shoulder. Not Kushina. He turned. Namikaze Minato was 23 years old and had the particular quality of people who would become legends. Not charismatic in the usual sense, not louder or larger than the room, but somehow more present. Blonde hair, not quite as bright as Naruto's own. Blue eyes, sharp and calm in a way that suggested they were cataloging several things simultaneously. A small, thoughtful smile that reached all the way to those eyes. Looking at him was like looking at an old photograph of yourself and understanding, for the first time, where your face came from. You're the Uzumaki she found, Minato said. His voice was measured and warm, the voice of someone who'd been in command long enough to know that first impressions were also assessments. Welcome to the base. I'm Namikaze Minato. I'm responsible for this sector's Konoha operations. He extended a hand. Naruto shook it. His hand was steady. He was very proud of his hand. Uzumaki Naruto, he said. Thank you for having me. Minato's eyes did something. A brief focusing, like a lens adjusting. Uzumaki. Kushina's clan, distant branch. The eyes kept focusing. Your chakra signature is unusual. Not alarming, just unusual. He said it conversationally, like a person noting interesting weather. I have a strong sensitivity to chakra patterns. Occupational habit. Of course he did. Because Minato Namikaze was a sensor type and a genius and the man who had eventually developed the Flying Thunder God Mark system, which required exactly the kind of refined chakra reading he was deploying right now. I've been told, Naruto said carefully, that Uzumaki's signatures often register strangely to outside sensors. Something about the longevity chakra concentration. This was true. He'd read it in a scroll. He was hoping it was enough. Minato considered this for a moment. Yes, that's likely it. He smiled again, and the smile was his father's smile, and the specific way Naruto's chest ached at it was something he would never explain to anyone. We'll get you processed and settled, and then, if you're willing, I'd like to hear about the Western Ridge situation. First-hand accounts are always more useful than reports. Of course, Naruto said. Minato nodded, already turning towards some other demand on his attention. Then he paused, looked back over his shoulder. She brought you through then, he said. Kushina. It wasn't quite a question. She found me, Naruto said. And then she got me here. I wouldn't have made it without her. Something moved in Minato's expression, complex and quick and carefully organized before it could be read. He nodded once more. No, he said. Most people wouldn't. And he walked away. Naruto stood in the middle of the forward base, surrounded by the sounds and smells of a war he'd only known as history, and breathed. He had made it to the base. He had not destroyed the timeline. He had not given himself away. And he had shaken his father's hand. He found a wall and put his back against it, and stayed there for a moment, just breathing, letting himself have 1 minute where nobody needed anything from him, and he didn't have to be careful. Somewhere across the camp, he could hear Kushina's voice, raised in what was apparently an argument with a logistics officer about the supply count from her last mission. She was extremely specific about the numbers and not at all interested in the logistics officer's explanations. He closed his eyes. He listened to the sound of her fighting with a bureaucrat. He let himself have that, too, just for a minute. Then he pushed off the wall and went to find the processing station, because the timeline wasn't going to protect itself. The processing station was a folding table, a tired Chunin named Ogata, and a stack of forms that had been designed by someone who had clearly never been in the field and imagined that people arriving from enemy territory had the time and documentation to answer 47 specific questions about their unit designation, supply allocation number, and the name of the Jonin who had authorized their original deployment. Naruto sat across from Ogata and answered what he could. Previous unit? Ogata said, pen hovering. Separated in the Western Ridge ambush 6 days ago. Naruto kept his voice neutral. I don't know the status of the others. Ogata made a note. Didn't look up. He had the face of a man who had processed too many of these conversations, and had developed a professional layer of armor against the specific weight they carried. Jonin designation? I operated under independent contract for this campaign. Which was not entirely a lie. Jiraiya had functioned independently enough that the distinction was more technical than substantial. My commanding sensei is deceased. Previous campaign. Also true. Ogata looked up at that. Just briefly. The armor thinned for a moment. I'm sorry. Thank you, the pen resumed. Chakra nature? Wind primary. Some secondary. Kekkei Genkai? No. Technically. The tailed beast didn't count as a Kekkei Genkai and the Uzumaki longevity chakra didn't either. He was comfortable with this answer. Special techniques on file? He thought carefully. Uzumaki chain ceiling, basic level. Standard Fuinjutsu. Taijutsu. Ninjutsu standard catalog. He paused. Rasengan type technique. Ogata wrote it all down without reaction except for a small pause at the last item. Rasengan type. That's the Namake's technique. My sensei had a connection to that school of development, Naruto said carefully. I learned a variant. Ogata looked at him for a moment. The weight of the moment was not lost on Naruto. The Rasengan was, in this timeline, closely associated with one person. Claiming it was a small flag. A necessary one. He couldn't have Kushina's account of the fight and his own capability log be inconsistent. But a flag nonetheless. I'll note the connection for the commander's debrief, Ogata said. Of course. The rest of the forms took another 20 minutes. Naruto answered what he could, constructed what he had to, and maintained the steady, mild expression of a person who was perfectly comfortable with this process and had absolutely nothing to hide. When it was done, Ogata handed him a provisional identification slip, a bunk assignment, and a thin folder of base orientation material that included a map, mess hall schedule, and a half-page on noise protocols. Welcome to Forward Base Kagen, Ogata said. Try not to die. It was delivered entirely without irony. Naruto decided he liked Ogata. His bunk was in a long, low structure that housed roughly 20 other shinobi, a mix of ranks, a mix of backgrounds, the specific cross-section that a sustained forward operation assembled from whoever was available. He found his assigned spot, dropped his pack, and sat for a moment in the dim interior. The bunk to his left was empty. The one to his right had a sleeping occupant. Shinobi slept at strange hours, nothing unusual, whose soft snoring suggested the profound unconsciousness of someone who had recently completed something exhausting. Naruto lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the low ceiling. He was exhausted. He was also too wound up to sleep, which was not a new experience. His brain had always treated fatigue as a suggestion rather than a directive. He ran through the day's accounting instead. Cover story. Holding. Minato was curious but not alarmed. Ogata had flagged the Rasengan connection, but it was defensible. Kushina had presented his cover as settled fact, which was more useful than she knew. Position, stable for now. He had resources, a bunk, access to supplies, a provisional identity within the base's operating structure. He could function here without immediate risk of exposure. Timeline status, unknown but apparently intact. Nothing he had done in 4 days seemed to have altered anything he knew. The camp looked as it should. The people he recognized from records were present. The war was proceeding along the lines he expected. What he needed to do next: be quiet. Be useful. Be unremarkable. Attend the debrief with Minato and give the minimum useful information. Do not give tactical intelligence from the future. Do not develop any techniques that didn't exist yet. Do not. He was asleep before he finished the sentence. He dreamed of nothing at all, which was a rare mercy. He met them at the debriefing the following morning, a small, warm structure that served as the command nerve center, with maps on every surface and a smell of tea that had been reheated past its natural life. They arranged themselves around a central table with the ease of people who had worked together long enough to have assigned roles that didn't require discussion. Minato himself sat at the head, not presiding exactly, more like anchoring. The center of gravity. To his left, Kushina, who arrived exactly on time and didn't look at Naruto when he came in, which told him she noticed him come in. She was in a fresh uniform, and her hair was braided back with the contained energy of someone who'd made a decision about efficiency that morning. To Minato's right, a young man named Takeda Rinji, a Jonin sensor type with close-cropped dark hair and the very still quality that sensors often had. They processed so much ambient information that visible reactions became a conservation measure. He was maybe 21. He looked at Naruto the way sensor types looked at everything, like he was reading fine print. Across from Rinji, Noira Rin, who Naruto knew from accounts but had never met. She was 16, young, serious, with dark eyes and a medic's specific attentiveness to the physical state of everyone in the room. She catalogued him when he sat down, quick, systematic, the visual assessment of a medic establishing baselines. She then smiled at him, which was warm and uncomplicated and slightly disarming. Uzumaki Naruto, Minato said. Thank you for coming. This is informal. I just want to understand what you saw on the Western Ridge. Naruto told the story he built. He told it cleanly, without extras, the way a competent field operative would tell a story. Chronological, relevant details only, no editorializing. He described the ambush he'd invented, the separation, the movement through enemy territory, the engagement where Kushina had found him. Minato listened. Rinji listened with his eyes slightly unfocused, which was how sensors listened, processing the chakra of the speaker alongside the words. Rin took a few notes. Kushina looked at her hands. The Western Ridge Patrol route, Minato said when Naruto finished. The ambush you described, composition of the IW-18? For a standard combat class. No sensor type visible, though there may have been one at range. Their coordination was good but not exceptional. They reacted to movement rather than chakra, which suggests the sensor, if present, wasn't close. Minato made a note. That's consistent with what we know about their Western Patrol structure. He looked up. You have some training in tactical assessment. My sensei put weight on it. Who was your sensei? The question was asked casually. Not a pressure, just a natural follow-up. But Rinji's eyes had refocused, which meant he was paying close attention now. A traveling jonin. He's gone now. He let a natural pause sit there. He wasn't attached to any one village, he moved between contracts. But he trained me to Konoha standards because that's where he'd spent the most time. He met Minato's eyes steadily. I can provide the list of training competencies from the debrief if you want to cross-reference. Minato studied him for a moment. Those blue eyes were doing the lens adjustment thing again, reading something more than words. No need, he said finally. Kushina vouches for your affiliation, and your competencies are on record. A brief, measured pause. I'd like you to stay with the base for now rather than attempt to rejoin any other unit. Given the disrupted routes, reassigning you to a forward deployment here makes more sense operationally. That works for me, Naruto said. Good. Minato's small smile. We can use capable people. Renji was still doing the fine print reading. He hadn't said a word through the entire debrief. As they were rising to leave, he spoke for the first time, directed at Naruto, conversationally. Your chakra signature has a strange harmonic. Naruto paused. Kept his face easy. I've been told it reads oddly on sensors. Uzumaki longevity concentration. Yes, Renji said. That's probably it. He didn't sound like someone who found that probably it. He sounded like someone who had written probably it on a file that would stay open. Naruto nodded pleasantly and walked out. Behind him, from inside the room, he heard Minato say something to Renji in a low voice. He didn't catch the words. He didn't need to. Forward base Kagen had its own ecology. Like all long-established field installations, the specific social structure that formed when people lived in compressed proximity under sustained pressure. There were the shinobi who had been there from the beginning and owned the institutional memory of the place, able to tell you which supply crate had the better ration bars and which patch of ground turned to mud and rain. There were the rotating arrivals, fresh from Konoha or pulled from other sectors, who arrived with outside world energy and gradually acclimated to the base's rhythms. There were the people who kept to themselves and the people who collected social connections the way some people collected tools, not for sentiment but for utility. Naruto had always been good at navigating these ecologies. Not naturally good, he had learned it the hard way. In the years when fitting in required conscious effort and the alternative was loneliness he'd gotten very tired of. He understood now, from enough distance, that he'd developed a genuine aptitude. He was good at finding the frequency a person was on and matching it without losing his own. He spent the first 2 days after the debrief doing exactly that. The medic tent became a natural first stop. Rin was there most mornings, and she was inclined toward warmth and conversation in a way that made it easy. She had the medic's gift of making you feel simultaneously examined and seen, which was its own kind of intimacy. How are the ribs? She asked, the first morning, in the matter-of-fact way medics asked things that would have been more intimate coming from anyone else. Better. He lifted his arm to demonstrate range. 2 days of rest helped. She checked anyway, pressing 2 fingers along the probable fracture site with the practiced precision of someone who didn't trust patient self-assessment. Cracked, not broken. You were lucky. She looked up at him with those dark, clear eyes. Kushina said you fought 4 of them. She saved me. I was holding out. Something moved in Rin's expression, fond and slightly amused. That sounds like how she tells it too. She finished her assessment and stepped back. She doesn't like to be thanked. If you try to thank her properly, she'll find something to argue about. I noticed. It's not that she doesn't appreciate it. She just doesn't know what to do with gratitude that comes without a task attached to it. Rin paused. She's been here 6 weeks and she's never once sat down in the mess hall when there wasn't something she needed from someone else who was sitting there. He thought about the 4-day walk, the way she moved, always with purpose, always with a destination or a reason. The way she'd slept immediately and completely, as if rest were just another item to process. The letter she'd read in private and put back away without mentioning again. She's used to moving, he said. She's used to needing to move, Rin corrected, with the gentleness of someone who'd thought about this carefully. There's a difference. He stayed in the medic tent longer than he'd planned. Renji was harder. He found the sensor type at the perimeter most evenings. A habit Renji had of walking the outer boundary at dusk, when the long-range environmental readings were sharpest in the cooling air. Naruto joined him once, offering no particular justification. Renji didn't object. He also didn't initiate conversation, which Naruto matched. They walked half the perimeter in complete silence before Renji said, "You suppress your signature." Not accusing. Observing. All field operatives learn signature suppression, Naruto said. Yes. But yours is active suppression, not trained suppression. Active suppression is something you turn on, not something you've integrated. He paused at a sentry marker and crouched to check something Naruto couldn't see. Whatever it was, a sensor checked at a sentry marker. Most people who use active suppression are either very powerful or very unusual. Sometimes both. I've trained with it for a long time, Naruto said. It's become semi-automatic. Renji stood and looked at him directly. The Uzumaki longevity harmonic is real. It does create irregular readings. I was accounting for it when I made the assessment. He paused. Underneath the longevity harmonic and underneath the active suppression, there's something very large. The quality of the moment changed. Large how? Naruto said. Like the difference between a bonfire and a sun. Renji said it without drama. I've felt large chakra signatures before. The commander's, at his peak, is significant. Yours, without the suppression, would be in a different category. A pause. I mention it not to alarm you, but because I think you should know that I know, and that I'm not going to say anything about it. Naruto held still. Why not? Because you've done nothing threatening. Because Kushina brought you through, and she doesn't bring threats through. Renji looked back at the perimeter, and because in 6 years of field work, the most dangerous thing I've found is pushing someone with secrets toward a corner. Cornered things bite. He resumed walking. Naruto walked beside him. Thank you, Naruto said, after a moment. Don't thank me. Just don't do anything that makes me regret it. That seems fair. They finished the perimeter in silence. At the end of it, Renji said, You fight like someone who's been in larger wars than this. He said it lightly, almost to himself. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked back toward the command structure and left Naruto at the perimeter's edge, looking out at the darkening hills. It wasn't a formal sparring area, just a flat patch of ground between two storage structures where people practiced when they needed to move, and the schedule didn't allow for actual missions. She was running kata on her own, not the structured kata of formal training, but the personal kind, sequences assembled from what worked for her, repeated until they were below thought. She moved well. That wasn't surprising. She moved in a way that felt like something older than technique, something that lived in her body's own logic. The specific language of a person who had been fighting since before fighting was a choice. He watched from a distance for a moment. Then she spoke without pausing or turning. If you want to spar, say so. If you're just going to watch, go find something else to do. He walked into the cleared area. Spar. She stopped, turned. Assessed him briefly, his posture, his footwork, the way he was holding his weight. Whatever she calculated, it resulted in a nod. No ninjutsu, she said. Taijutsu only. I'm not interested in blowing up the supply storage. Agreed. She came at him without preamble. The first exchange lasted about 4 seconds, which he thought was actually quite good considering her speed. She was fast in a way that was slightly different from the shinobi he trained against most often. Sakura was precision, each strike placed with surgical exactness. Sasuke was flow, the seamless connection between offensive and defensive. Kushina was pressure. She attacked from multiple angles in rapid sequence, each individual strike less about landing and more about accumulating force and denying his space. The goal was to reduce his available positions until there was only one, and she was waiting in it. He slipped the first sequence, engaged the second, caught the third on a forearm block that jarred his teeth slightly. She stepped back, read him, came again. He matched her. Not fully. He was calibrating to the base level he'd established, suppressing the instincts that would have responded with things he wasn't supposed to know yet. But he matched her at her speed, which he could tell surprised her. She adjusted, pushed harder. This was what he'd wanted. A test without words. For 15 minutes they moved through the clearing. Not a real fight, not even close, but a genuine exploration of capability. She tested his range, his reflexes, his response to pressure from her left side versus her right. He tested the same. They didn't speak. They communicated in the language of the exchange. She stopped eventually by mutual unspoken agreement. Both of them slightly winded, either damaged. You've got a gap on your right side, she said. I know. Old injury. He rotated the shoulder in demonstration. It compensates. She nodded. She was breathing normally now. Recovery was fast. You're better than you've been showing. He made a sound that he hoped conveyed you're imagining things. She tilted her head. You pulled that third sequence. You had the counter, and you didn't take it. I wasn't sure of the space. You were sure of the space. You had a clean angle and you checked. She said it without accusation but without any room for escape either. You're editing. All shinobi edit in unfamiliar sparring situations. Not that specifically. She folded her arms. You knew exactly what to do and you decided not to do it. He held her gaze. Said nothing. I've been thinking about you, she said. Matter of fact, as if this were a mission briefing. Since the ridge. I've been thinking about the things you say that sound like they're from somewhere I can't find on a map. The way you react to things. Sometimes you look at something and you already know what you're going to see. The ration on the second night. You ate the whole thing without making a face. Which means you've eaten worse. Which means your field experience is longer than your age should allow. She paused. And that technique? The spinning chakra ball. You told me your sensei developed it. But the way you used it, you didn't use it like someone working from a taught technique. You used it like it's yours. The evening had gone blue around them. The camp sounds came from a distance. You're building a case, he said. I'm observing. What's the theory? She studied him for a long moment. I don't have a theory yet. I have a collection of things that don't fit the explanation you've given me. She unfolded her arms. I'm a patient person when I need to be. I can wait for the picture to develop. You're not a patient person at all, he said before he could stop himself. She blinked. He held absolutely still. Then, slowly, something happened at the corner of her mouth. The ghost of a smile. Real this time, not the almost there flicker he'd seen before, but something actual. Something that reached her eyes. No, she said. I'm not. The smile settled into something dry and self-aware. I just said what I wanted to sound like. He felt something ease in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. I'll tell you what I can, he said. When I can. She looked at him for a moment more. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy some inner condition. Not trust exactly, but tolerance of mystery. An Uzumaki thing, maybe. They were all built to sit with forces they couldn't fully name. Okay, she said. She picked up the jacket she'd set aside for the spar and shrugged it back on. Come to mess hall. I need to argue with the supply officer again, and you can be a witness. He followed her. He found Minato reading in the command structure late that night. Not by accident. He'd been thinking about the Renji conversation all day. Had been thinking about the way Minato's eyes adjusted when they looked at him. Had been trying to calculate how long he could maintain a stable presence here before the commander's intelligence made the calculation Naruto was afraid of. He needed to understand what Minato knew. Minato looked up from his text when Naruto knocked on the open door frame. No surprise, he'd been a censor long enough that surprise at arrivals was a thing that happened to other people. Naruto. Come in. He came in. The command structure was mostly empty at this hour. One aide dozing over a stack of reports in the far corner. Minato gestured to a chair across the table from him, and Naruto sat. Couldn't sleep? Minato asked. He put down his text, a tactical analysis of something, from the look of it. I sleep lightly in new environments. Field habit. It's useful. Minato considered him with the warm, measuring patience that Naruto had already identified as one of his defining qualities. Was there something you wanted to discuss? I wanted to ask about the operation. He prepared this. The supply disruption mission that Kushina's team completed. You said it was successful, mostly. What does mostly mean, in terms of the current strategic picture? It was the kind of question a competent shinobi assigned to a new base would ask. Normal. Appropriate. Not overstepping. Minato accepted it as exactly that. He talked about the Western supply line, the IWA repositioning that had followed the disruption, the cascading effects on their forward company's ability to sustain pressure. He talked about it in the way of someone who thought strategically as naturally as breathing, not showing off, just thinking out loud with someone he provisionally decided was worth thinking out loud with. Naruto listened. Confirmed what he already knew. Added nothing he shouldn't add. Asked follow-up questions that were based on the public-facing information. At some point in the middle of this, Minato said, without a transitional pause, slipping it into the conversation like a smooth stone into water, do you know what a space-time disruption signature looks like? On a sensor? The temperature in the room didn't change. Nothing moved. No, Naruto said. I don't have strong sensor training. Minato nodded slowly. It's rare. I've only encountered it once before in field conditions. He picked up his text again, a gesture that should have read as dismissal but felt like something else. It creates a specific kind of resonance, something that doesn't quite sync with the present moment. Like a note that's slightly out of tune with the chord. A pause. Not wrong. Just displaced. Naruto said nothing. Chakra carries time, Minato continued conversationally. That's a fairly well-established theory in Fuinjutsu research. The idea that chakra is partially constituted by the moment of its origin, which is why old seals still work, why the chakra in a summoning contract retains the shape of the original agreement. He looked at the text in his hand rather than at Naruto. Theoretically, a chakra signature that was constituted in a different moment than the current one would read as displaced. Present, but resonating from somewhere else. Silence. That's interesting theory, Naruto said. His voice was steady. He was quite impressed with his voice. Minato looked at him then. Direct, quiet, blue eyes doing the lens adjustment. You have that signature, he said. Naruto. The name, with that weight to it, without the family name, just the name, landed in the air between them. Naruto met his eyes. I know, he hadn't planned to say it. It just came out. Tired of the careful maintenance, some deeper honesty breaking through the constructed surface. Minato was very still. You know, he said, I know what you're reading. I know what the signature means. Naruto held his gaze. I can't explain it in a way you'd find satisfying. A long pause. The sleeping aide turned over in the corner and settled again. The lamp between them cast a small, warm circle of light. Can you tell me if you're a threat? Minato asked. Quiet. Direct. No accusation in it. A man who needed the essential information and was asking for it plainly. No, Naruto said. I'm not a threat. To Konoha. To anyone here. He kept the eye contact. I can't tell you why I'm here or how I got here or how long I'll be here. But I swear to you, on everything that matters to me, that I'm not a threat to anyone in this base. Minato studied him for what felt like a long time. Alright, he said. Just that. Alright. You're not going to ask more questions? Naruto said carefully. I'm going to ask more questions, Minato said. But not tonight. Tonight you told me what I actually needed to know, and I believe you. He picked up his text again. I'll want to understand more eventually. The analytical part of my brain is very loud about that. I'll answer what I can. That's all I can ask. He was reading again. Or performing reading, Naruto couldn't quite tell. Get some sleep. There's a supply mission being organized for day after tomorrow and I'm going to put you on it. Naruto stood, feeling the strange weightlessness of having confessed something without explaining it. Minato-san, he said, and his voice did something he hadn't controlled at the honorific. Something slightly raw around the edges. Minato looked up. Thank you, Naruto said. For believing me. Minato looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind those blue eyes, complex and unresolved and too careful to identify. Something about you, he said quietly, not quite to Naruto, not quite to himself, is very familiar. He looked back down at his text. Naruto left. He walked back through the quiet camp, past the bunk structures and the medic tent and the supply storage, and he sat outside on a supply crate and looked up at the stars and let himself shake for a while, just quietly. Just for a minute. His father had looked at him and found him familiar. His father had said I believe you because he trusted his own assessment of a person's honesty, and his assessment had been right. And the word I believe you coming from Minato Namikaze at 23 years old meant something he could not have prepared for. He sat there until the shaking stopped. Then he went to bed. Kushina found him the next morning before the sun had fully established itself. She materialized at the entrance to the bunk structure while he was lacing his boots, with the specific quality of a person who had been waiting for a reasonable hour, and found it not quite reasonable enough but acceptable. Walk with me, she said. Not a question. He walked. She took him to the perimeter, the outer edge of the camp, where the rock formations began and the sentries were spaced far enough apart to create genuine privacy. The morning was cold and pale, and her breath made small clouds in the air. She stopped at a point where the rock curved and gave them a contained space. Minato talked to you last night, she said. Yes, about your signature, among other things. She looked at the rocks. She was turning something over in her mind. He could see it in the way she was holding herself, the contained stillness she got when she was building towards something. He's not alarmed, she said. I asked him this morning. He said you were fine. He said it without qualification, which means he asked the question he actually needed to ask and he got the answer. She paused. He doesn't give unqualified answers about people unless he's sure. That's good to know. What I want to know, she said, is what question he asked. He looked at her profile. The straight line of her nose, the set of her jaw, the particular quality of attention she gave the middle distance when she was working through something. He asked if I was a threat, Naruto said. I told him I wasn't, and he believed you. He believed me, because you're not lying. She turned to face him. Violet eyes, direct and clear in the morning light. You're not a liar. I said you were a bad liar on the first day, but that's not quite right. You're not a liar at all. You're someone who's choosing very carefully what truth to tell and when. A pause. That's different. He said nothing. You know things, she said. More than you should. You react to things before they're said. You look at Minato like, she stopped. Reconsidered. Like he matters to you in a way that doesn't fit the week you've known him. Another pause. You looked at me on the first day like you already knew my name before I said it. His heart was doing something complicated. Kushina, I'm not asking you to explain, she said. I'm not. I know there are things you can't tell me. I'm not built for sitting with mystery, but I can learn when I have to. She held his gaze steadily. What I'm asking is this. Is it bad? Whatever you know that you're not saying. Is it something bad, for the people here? He thought about what bad meant. He thought about what was coming. He thought about the specific unbearable weight of knowing timelines. Not for the base, he said. Not for this mission. She heard the narrowness of that. She let it sit for a moment, reading the shape of what he'd said and what he hadn't. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. That's enough. She turned and started back toward the camp. He fell into step beside her, not behind her, but beside her, which was a small shift they'd made somewhere in 4 days of walking and hadn't commented on. Naruto, she said after a while. Yeah, you look at me like I'm a ghost. She said it without drama, without emotion, just placing the observation in front of him like a stone on a table. Like I'm someone you remember from somewhere you can't get back to. He breathed in. Breathe out. I know, he said. She didn't ask him to explain. She walked beside him through the pale morning, her shoulder occasionally close enough to brush his, and the ghost he was looking at walked too, warm and real and alive and so far from the stone with her name on it that the distance between now and then felt, just for a moment, like something that could be crossed. He knew it couldn't be. He walked beside her anyway. Naruto was already awake. He'd been awake for an hour, which was a habit from his own war, the body's insistence on treating the pre-dawn as its most honest hour. He'd been lying in his bunk running through the mental accounting he'd made into a nightly ritual, timeline stable, cover intact, Kurama's connection strengthening, emotional management acceptable, everything proceeding in a direction that could be called controlled. He heard the perimeter alarm at the same moment he felt the chakra signatures, a dense, organized mass of them, coming in from the northeast, and behind them something larger, the deep subterranean rumble of prepared Doton techniques about to activate. He was on his feet, and out of the bunk structure before the second alarm. The camp was already moving. Years of sustained combat had given everyone here the ability to go from sleep to operational in under a minute. The bunk structure emptied around him in a surge of bodies, voices, the specific controlled urgency of people who drilled for exactly this. He scanned the perimeter. The northeast. 4 positions, multiple signatures. They were already inside the outer boundary. Either the sentries had been compromised or the IWA team had used a tunneling approach that had bypassed the perimeter sensors entirely. Most likely the tunnel. That was the pattern for this phase of the war. Iwa's Doton specialists had been using subsurface approach vectors to get strike teams inside defended positions before the alarm triggered. He'd read about this attack. Or something that sounded like this attack. In a scroll that Minato had written years later. A tactical retrospective on the Third War that was standard reading at the Academy. Forward Base Kagan, the dawn offensive of the 14th week. Listed as a significant engagement. Listed as a successful defense with heavy casualties. Heavy casualties. He was running toward the northeast perimeter before the thought finished forming. The first thing he encountered was an IWA strike team of 8 emerging from a crack in the earth they'd made themselves. Earthwork torn open by Doton. 4 of them already up and engaging 2 Konoha Chunin who'd been on sentry duty and were now outnumbered and backing up fast. He hit the formation from the side. He was careful. He was trying to be careful. He used his kunai, used taijutsu, used the physical techniques that existed now without anything that shouldn't. He was managing his output, calibrating to the level of a competent Jonin-class shinobi, which was what he was supposed to be. He put 3 of them down before the remaining 5 reorganized and adjusted. One of the Chunin sentries got clear. The other took a hit that wasn't lethal but put him on the ground. Naruto stayed between the downed sentry and the remaining 5. This was manageable. This was fine. He could handle 5 standard combat class IWA shinobi at his suppressed level without. The ground exploded, not figuratively. A Doton technique from 30 meters away, seismic and massive, the kind that required either a very powerful user or 2 coordinated users working in tandem. The shockwave threw him sideways and he hit a supply crate hard enough to see lights, and when the world resorted itself the situation had changed. The remaining 5 had been reinforced. More emergence points. They'd had multiple tunnel teams, staged at intervals, the second wave keyed to deploy once the first wave engaged and drew attention. 12 IWA shinobi between him and the northeast perimeter. More coming, and from behind him, at the center of the camp, fire. An actual fire, ignition technique, catching the command structure's outer wall, which meant a separate insertion team had gotten through the south perimeter. The tactical picture assembled itself in his head in about 2 seconds and the result was not good. The command structure, Minato would be there, already responding, already brilliant and dangerous. This was his domain. He had that. The medical tent, Rin was there. In the original history, the medical tent had been attacked in this engagement. He knew this. He knew because the retrospective scroll had noted it specifically. The medical staff sustained significant casualties in the south insertion attack. He knew this and he had not done anything about it, and he could not change that now. He put it down. Hard and fast, the way he'd learned to put things down in his own war. He had 12 IWA shinobi in front of him and more coming and a downed sentry behind him who wasn't going to survive being here when the next ground strike came. He picked up the sentry. Dead weight. The man was semi-conscious. And he moved. He was fast. Genuinely, unedited fast, not the suppressed version. There was no room for the suppressed version when he needed to cover 20 meters with a person in his arms while 12 shinobi were reorganizing. He cleared the space, got the sentry behind a stone formation that would hold against most Doton techniques, set him down, turned back. 12 of them, and now they were organized and coming. He was still trying to be careful. He pulled wind chakra through his hands, built a technique that existed now, wind release, vacuum sphere, a scattered shot that forced them to break formation and scramble. Bought himself 3 seconds. Used the 3 seconds to close the distance on the nearest cluster, taijutsu, kunai, efficient and brutal and getting through it. He heard her. The chains. The specific crackling discharge of Kushina's chakra chains, from somewhere behind him and to the left, which meant she'd come through the west axis, and was dealing with whatever was coming from that side, which also meant she was 30 meters away in a live engagement with her back exposed to the northeast. He couldn't see her. He couldn't get to her. He had 8 people still operational in front of him, and a downed sentry who needed the stone formation to hold, and 3 of the 8 had turned toward her. Toward the sound of the chains. He stopped managing his output. The Rasengan that he formed in his right hand was not a standard Rasengan. It was, he would try to describe it later to himself, in the accounting he ran afterward, and he would not find a satisfying description. Not the wind release, Rasengan, which added a cutting element. Not the Rasen Shuriken, which would have destroyed the eastern block of the camp. Something between, a compressed spiral of wind chakra at its core, spinning at the frequency that he'd developed over years of refinement. A technique that existed in his time and not in this one. He hit 2 of the 3 who'd turned toward Kushina. The impact was not subtle. The shockwave cleared a radius of 12 meters, not a killing technique, but a finishing one, the kind that left people unconscious rather than dead when it worked the way it was supposed to. It worked the way it was supposed to. The remaining 6 registered what had just happened, the magnitude of the release, the specific shape of the technique. They processed it the way trained shinobi processed unexpected variables, assess, adapt, consider. He gave them 3 more seconds and then he was through them. Minato had the south insertion handled within 12 minutes, 3 ANBU and his own personal output, which was the kind of thing that later got written down in training manuals as an example of decisive command action. The fire was extinguished. The southeast team was eliminated. Renji directed the sensor operation from the center of the camp, tracking the remaining IWA signatures as they either engaged or retreated, coordinating the response with the flat efficiency of someone in absolute command of their domain. He'd identified the subsurface tunnel approach before the third wave could deploy and put 2 Doton users on the collapse operation. The northeast insertion was broken. 47 minutes, and then the camp was quiet except for the sounds of aftermath. Medics moving between the injured, voices low and purposeful. The specific silence of people assessing what was gone and what remained. The cost was real. Not catastrophic, not the heavy casualties the retrospective had suggested, which meant either his intervention had changed something or the historical record had been imprecise. 3 Konoha shinobi dead. 7 injured, 2 seriously. The command structure's outer wall burned down to the support frame. He sat down on a rock near the northeast perimeter and breathed. His right hand was humming. The residue of the technique always took a few minutes to settle. He flexed his fingers slowly and watched the last of the chakra static disperse. The cracked ribs Rin had wrapped protested the fight. He'd been ignoring them for 47 minutes, and they were now presenting their bill, a dull insistent ache along his right side. He'd had worse. He was sitting like that, head dropped forward slightly, right hand flexing, ribs complaining, when he heard her footsteps. He recognized them already, which was either impressive field attunement or something he wasn't going to examine closely. Kushina sat down on the rock beside him, not across from him. Beside him. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her even in the cooling morning air. She didn't say anything for a moment. Northeast is clear, she said finally. I know. Another moment. That technique, she said. Kushina, I saw it. She said it without accusation, without drama. Flat and certain. I was 30 meters away and I saw it. The discharge radius, the chakra composition, the spiral signature. She paused. That is not the same technique you showed me on the ridge. He was very tired. The combat exhaustion and the emotional weight of the last hour had burned through whatever reserves he'd been running on, and sitting here in the cooling aftermath with her beside him, he found he didn't have the energy to build another wall. No, he said. It's not. It's more developed. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. It saved my life. Those 3 that turned. A pause, something controlled moving through her voice. I was occupied. I didn't have the angle. I know. Another silence. The sun was coming up now, the real sun, slow and pale, cresting the eastern hills and laying a thin gold line across the rock formations. Around them the camp was beginning its proper morning despite everything, because camps did that, because people did that, found the next thing to do and did it. How long have you had it? She asked. That version of the technique. He thought about how to answer this. He thought about the training grounds at 16 where he'd first figured out the wind integration, about Kakashi's patient guidance and Yamato's structural support and the pure, grinding work of development over months of failure before the first clean execution. He thought about how old the technique felt in his hand, like something that had always been there, and he'd just been learning to hear it. Years, he said. Years, she repeated. You're 17. I've been training since I was small. So has everyone here. She paused. That's not what I mean. That technique, the level of chakra control required, the integration, the output magnitude, that's not something most jonin have. That's something you build over a decade. At least. She said it without any particular emotion, just the assessment of someone who understood her field. You're 17, he said nothing. She turned to look at him. He didn't turn to meet her eyes. He looked at his right hand instead, still flexing slowly, and felt the distance between what he could tell her and what he couldn't press against the inside of his chest. I've been doing this my whole life, he said, which was true. Since before I should have. Because I had to. Also true. It accelerated things. She was quiet for a long moment. Because you had to, she repeated softly. Not challenging it. Sitting with it. Yes. What were you? She stopped. Reconsidered. He heard her making the decision he'd seen her make before. The choice to wait for information to come to her rather than pulling at it. It clearly cost her something. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm not going to ask. Not today. She shifted slightly, and then her hand was on his, the one he'd been flexing, covering it with a firm and entirely unsentimental warmth. Stopping the flexing, holding it still. You're shaking, she said. He was. Slightly, fine motor level, the kind of tremor that happened after high-output chakra use when the channels were cycling back down. He hadn't noticed. Post technique, he said. I know what it is. She didn't release his hand. Let it settle. He let it settle. She kept her hand over his and looked out at the morning, and he sat beside her and didn't speak, and the gold line across the hills slowly widened into full dawn. After a while, it might have been 5 minutes, it might have been 15, the tremor stopped. He wasn't sure exactly when. He wasn't paying enough attention to his hand. She turned to look at him then. He met her eyes, violet in the morning light, steady and direct and carrying something he recognized as the precursor to something important. You're not from the land of waves, she said, not a question. Not even a statement, exactly. Something more like a door being opened and propped so it couldn't close again. He looked at her. No, he said. Her jaw moved. Not a clench, more like someone accepting the landing of a weight they'd been prepared for. Are you from somewhere that exists? His throat tightened. Yes. Are you from now? The question hung in the morning air between them. He looked at her face. The face that was and wasn't the photograph in the Hokage archive. The face that was so much more alive than any record could be. The face that in 16 years would be the last thing she ever saw when she looked in a mirror and found it acceptable. Brave. Hers. That's a more complicated question than it sounds, he said. Something moved through her expression. Not shock, he noticed. Not disbelief. More like the specific expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed by evidence they were already holding. You knew my name, she said. What? The first day. I introduced myself, and you already knew it. I watched your face. Her eyes held his. You knew my name before I said it. He hadn't thought she'd caught that. He had underestimated her, which he should have known not to do. And you knew Minato's name. You said you'd heard of him. But the way you said it, she paused. It's not the way someone says a name they know from a reputation. It's the way someone says a name they know from. She stopped. Something was happening in her eyes, something that looked like the very beginnings of an equation resolving. From somewhere closer, he held her gaze and said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at their hands, hers still covering his still in hers. You can't tell me, she said. Not everything. No, she nodded slowly. The equation was still resolving. He could see it, the parts of it she had and the gaps she was navigating around. She didn't have enough information to see the full picture. He didn't think she'd arrived at the specific, devastating truth of what their connection was, but she was close. She was always close. Is it bad? She asked again, the same question she'd asked at the perimeter. Whatever you are and wherever you're from, is it bad for the people here? No, he said. It's not bad for anyone here. She nodded. Processing. Then I'll wait, she said. I know you hate waiting. She looked at him, and there it was again, the almost smile, slightly less ghost than usual. I hate it, she agreed. But I'm good at doing things I hate when I have to. She released his hand, not suddenly, not impatiently, with the same deliberateness with which she'd taken it. Come on. Minato will want a full debrief and Rin will want to look at those ribs. He got to his feet. She was already moving, purpose reassembled, the efficient forward motion restored. But she'd walked 3 steps before she paused, not turning. Naruto. Yeah, thank you? Said quickly, slightly awkward, the delivery of a person who'd had to learn this particular expression as an adult skill. For the 3 that turned. He wanted to say, there is nothing in any timeline, any version of this, any world, that I would not burn down before I let something happen to you. He wanted to say, you are the reason I know what it means to be loved before you are lovable, and you don't even know it yet. He wanted to say about 17 different things that would have destroyed everything. He said any time. She made the not quite laugh sound. Then she was walking, and he followed, and the morning was gold and cold around them, and he was in terrible trouble, and it felt, impossibly, inexplicably, like the best thing that had ever happened to him. The medic tent was organized chaos in the post-battle hour, Rin in the center of it, directing two other medic men with the focused authority that she'd apparently been born with but kept quiet until it was needed. She was 16 years old, and she was running a field triage like she'd been doing it for decades. She checked Naruto's ribs with the expression of someone whose original assessment had been validated in an unpleasant way. "You crack them further," she said. "They're just ribs. They're your ribs." She pressed a glowing hand to his side and he felt the warm cellular reconstruction begin. Her chakra was clean and precise, the kind of medical technique that required both technical mastery and a specific quality of attention that was, fundamentally, a form of care. "Hold still." He held still. From across the tent, Kushina was being examined by the other medic. She'd taken a hit on her left arm, minor, a graze from a kunai that had caught her during the chain engagement. She was telling the medic it was fine in a tone that suggested she considered the examination a formality. Rin tracked this with peripheral awareness while continuing to work on Naruto's ribs. Then she said, without looking up, "What happened on the northeast perimeter?" "Engagement with the IWA insertion team." A pause. Renji said the discharge was significant. It was a high-output situation. Renji said the chakra signature was. She stopped. Continued the reconstruction. He said it was unlike anything he'd recorded. Naruto was quiet. Rin finished the immediate reconstruction and stepped back, cleaning her hands on a cloth. She looked at him directly. Dark eyes. That medic attentiveness turned fully on. "She trusts you," Rin said quietly. Not an accusation. An observation offered carefully, because she clearly understood its weight. "I know. She doesn't." A pause. She seemed to be considering how much of Kushina's business was hers to reference. She made her choice. She doesn't do that quickly. Trust. Or at all, usually, until she decides to. And then completely. "I know," he said again. Rin looked at him for a long moment. "Don't let her get hurt," she said. It was the request of a person who'd already watched too many people get hurt, and had limited capacity for watching more. "I won't," he said. "Not if I can help it." "Not if I can help it" was the most honest answer he had. Rin seemed to understand that something in it was limited. He saw her read the qualification. She accepted it the way medics accepted imperfect options, by making note and continuing. "Good," she said, and moved to the next patient. He sat for a moment on the examination surface and looked across the tent at Kushina, who was now engaged in an argument with the other medic about whether she needed the arm wrapped, or whether the reconstruction had been sufficient. She was alive. She was arguing about bandages. She was so completely and specifically herself that the morning light through the tent fabric caught the red of her hair and made it look like fire. He breathed. He looked away before she could catch him looking. He was not always successful at that either. Minato ran the debrief at midday. The full team, plus the senior squad leaders from the base, sitting around the command structure's main table on its surviving 3 walls, the 4th having burned. Someone had hung a canvas over the gap and the morning light came through it in a diffuse, slightly orange glow. Minato presented the engagement analysis with the calm efficiency of a person who had already processed the immediate grief and moved into the operational frame, which was what commanders did because they had to. He would process the rest later, alone, the way people in his position processed the things that didn't have anywhere to go during the working day. He went around the table and asked each section for their account. He got to Naruto last. Naruto gave his account of the northeast engagement cleanly. The tunnel emergence, the sentry, the wave sequencing, the south perimeter fire drawing attention. He described his response at the suppressed level, gave the tactical logic. He said nothing about the technique. Minato looked at him for a moment when he finished. Renji reported an unusually significant chakra discharge from the northeast quadrant at approximately the 40-minute mark, Minato said. High output, wind affinity, spiral signature. He said it to the room, not specifically to Naruto. Anyone with additional information about that event? A brief silence. That was me, Naruto said. All eyes. High output wind technique, he continued. 3 targets presenting simultaneous threat to an allied position. He kept his voice level. I made a judgment call about force escalation. The technique employed? Minato asked. Still to the room. Still completely even. A variant I've developed. He met Minato's eyes directly across the table. Not standard catalog. I can provide a full technical description for the records. Something moved in Minato's expression, the lens adjustment, the reading of something more than words. And then, with the same smooth competence with which he ran everything, thank you. We can document it separately. He moved on. Supply damage assessment. Takeda, what's the materials situation? Renji took over, and the debrief continued, and Naruto breathed quietly through the moment's passage. Across the table, Kushina was looking at her own hands with the focused attention of someone who was specifically not looking at him. He understood that this was its own kind of communication. After the debrief, Minato asked him to stay. The others filed out, Renji last, with a brief, unreadable look at Naruto that he chose to read as neutral. The canvas door fell closed over the burned gap and they were alone in the orange diffuse light. Minato sat across from him for a moment without speaking. The technique, he said. Yes, you said a variant. It is a variant. Of the Rasengan. He held Minato's gaze. It builds on the rotational chakra compression at the core and integrates a secondary nature type. It's more powerful than the base technique. Minato was quiet. I invented the Rasengan 3 years ago, he said. I haven't shared the design specifications outside this team. The technique you used at the Ridge, I thought perhaps you had learned from the same source. An independent development. He paused. But a variant implies a foundational knowledge of the mechanism. It does, Naruto said, which implies either access to my technical documentation or, Minato stopped, or someone who understood the technique from a much closer source, Naruto finished. The orange light moved slowly across the table. You said the other night, Minato said carefully, that you couldn't explain where you were from in a satisfying way. That's still true, but not where you got the technique. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He was looking at his father's face. The face that was 23 years old and brilliant, and kind and so alive. And he was thinking about what honesty cost and what it gave back. I got it, he said, from someone who loved me more than I deserved. Who invested in my training more than any other single investment they made in their life. He paused. Someone I learned from and lost and still carry. He met Minato's eyes. That's the truest answer I can give you. Minato looked at him for a long time. Alright, he said. That word again. Alright. His father's word for I hear you. I'm choosing to trust you, we continue. Naruto breathed. Use what you need to use, Minato said. I'm not going to limit a technique that just saved allied lives because it doesn't fit the current catalog. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. But Naruto, when this is resolved, whatever it is, a pause. I'd like to understand it. The whole picture. If I can give it to you, Naruto said, I will. Minato nodded. He picked up the tactical analysis he'd been building before the debrief, rolled it under his arm, and moved toward the canvas door. He stopped in the gap, framed by orange light and the smell of char. That person, he said, without looking back. The one you learned from. You called them someone who invested more than anything else in your training. He paused. What would they think of how you've handled yourself here? Naruto swallowed. He thought about Minato's letter, the one he'd finally found in the Hokage archive years after the war. A personal note tucked into a mission report, never sent. He'd read it twice and never been able to read it a third time. I am not worried about whether you will be strong, the letter said, in handwriting that was neat and slightly formal, the handwriting of a man who taught himself precision. I am not worried about whether you will be brave. I am only worried about whether anyone will be beside you to help you carry it. That is the only thing. I think, Naruto said carefully, they'd be glad I was here. Minato left. Naruto sat for another minute in the orange diffuse light. Then he got up, because there was work to be done and the timeline wasn't going to protect itself, and he had a camp to be useful in, and he was, in some deep and irreducible way, the son of these two people, and that meant something about what he was supposed to do with the day. He stepped out into the afternoon, and Kushina was leaning against the outside wall of the command structure, arms folded, waiting with the very controlled impatience of someone who had been waiting for approximately as long as they were willing to. Took long enough, she said. Sorry. Don't apologize, just move faster. She pushed off the wall. Rin wants to do a full supply inventory. I told her you'd help. She started walking. You're good at that, making things fit. He fell into step beside her. Am I? Yes. She glanced at him sideways, violet direct. You fit things together that don't look like they belong. You see how they connect. A brief pause. It's useful. He thought about what she'd left unsaid, and strange. She left it unsaid because she'd moved the word from concerning to interesting, somewhere between the ridge and this afternoon, and didn't need to append it anymore. He walked beside her through the camp and thought, I am in deeper trouble than I have ever been. And I have no intention of getting out. His name was Hitaki Daisuke, and he was 15 years old, and he had been at Forward Base Kagan for 11 days when Naruto arrived. Naruto learned these facts in pieces, the way you learn things about people in field camps, not through deliberate introduction but through accumulation. He learned the name from the bunk assignment roster that he'd memorized his first night, because memorizing the roster was the kind of thing you did when you needed to know who was who and what the social topology of a place looked like. He learned the age from Rin, who mentioned it in passing during the supply inventory. The young one in bunks 4 through 7, the one who's always asking questions, 15. Can you believe Command approved it? He learned the 11-day detail from Ogata, who had processed Daisuke's arrival and remembered it because Daisuke had asked Ogata 23 questions during the processing, which was 22 more than most people asked. What Naruto learned through direct observation was this. Daisuke was a genin, technically speaking, though the word fit him the way oversized clothes fit a child. He'd outgrow the designation soon, was already outgrowing it, had the chakra control and the instincts of someone further along the path than his rank suggested. He had silver-gray hair, not old man silver, the bright silver white of someone born with it, and dark eyes that were serious more often than not. He wasn't the kind of boy who smiled easily. When he did smile, it rearranged his face entirely and lasted about 3 seconds before the seriousness returned, as if he considered levity something to be rationed. He was also, Naruto noticed, watching everything. Not in a suspicious way, in the way of someone who understood that information was the most important resource in a field camp and was collecting it diligently. He was always the last one to stop looking at a debrief map. He always knew where the medic kit was and where the backup medic kit was. He watched the Jonin class shinobi move and Naruto could see him cataloging the techniques, storing them for later processing. He reminded Naruto of someone. He couldn't quite place it, at first. He placed it on the 4th day. Daisuke asked him a question about wind nature chakra integration while they were both eating in the mess hall, a specific and technically sophisticated question that suggested he'd been sitting on it for a while, waiting for a moment that felt right to ask. Naruto answered it. Daisuke listened with the particular quality of someone who was recording rather than just hearing. He reminded Naruto of Kakashi, not the adult Kakashi, the Kakashi-sensei who had been the composite of decades of loss and growth and reconstruction. The young Kakashi, the one who existed in photographs and mission records from this era. The one who had been shaped by this exact war. The Kakashi who would be 15 years old right now, somewhere in this conflict, doing what Daisuke was doing, watching, cataloging, turning the machinery of his mind on the available information and coming up with questions that no one else had thought to ask. Naruto had had one sensei, really. One person who had looked at the loud, difficult, lonely boy he'd been at 12 and decided to take him seriously. Who had taught him things with one eye and read porn with the other and somehow managed both with perfect sincerity. He had been late to that grave. He had not said goodbye. He started answering Daisuke's questions whenever the boy had them. It began as something professional, the transfer of information from someone who had it to someone who needed it. The natural economy of a field camp. Daisuke had questions about technique theory, about tactical assessment, about the history of conflict between hidden villages that filled the gaps in what he'd been taught. Naruto answered what he could, redirected what he couldn't, let the questions get more complex over time as Daisuke understood that complex questions were welcome. It became something else gradually. Not dramatic. There was no moment where it tipped. It was just that one day Naruto noticed he was setting aside time in his day to find where Daisuke was and what he was working on, and that felt like a different category of thing. Daisuke, for his part, did not perform gratitude. He didn't soften around Naruto or follow him with the attached energy of someone who decided on a mentor. He continued to be serious and precise and to ask questions that sometimes stopped Naruto mid-sentence because the answer was more complicated than he'd assumed. What he did, instead, was this: on the 7th day, he left a small bag of dried fruit from the supplemental rations on Naruto's bunk. No note. Just there. On the 9th day, during a watch rotation where they ended up paired together, he said, without particular preamble, "You teach differently than the Jonin here." "How so?" "They answer what you ask. You answer what you mean." He looked at the perimeter. "It's unusual." Naruto was quiet for a moment. "Someone taught me that way once." Daisuke nodded slowly. "They must have been very good." "The best," Naruto said, and meant it in all the directions it could mean. The mission that took Daisuke was a supply escort. Routine, in the way that field operations had routine. A known route, a known risk level, a composition of 4 shinobi designed to be sufficient without drawing attention through excess. Naruto was not on the initial assignment. Daisuke was. He'd been added to the composition at the last minute when one of the original 4 came down with a fever that the medic tent couldn't clear fast enough. Minato had looked at the available roster, looked at Naruto, and said, "You've shown good judgment on perimeter operations. Are you comfortable with escort work?" "Yes," Naruto had said. He had not said, "I have a bad feeling about this." He had not said, "I don't know if this specific mission is safe." He had not said anything about the weight that had settled in his gut when he saw the route on the map. A weight that might have been genuine precognition or might have been the anxiety of someone who knew that wars took people without warning and had stopped being able to distinguish between intuition and fear. He had said yes. He had gone. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward, not the violence of it, which he had processed before through the brute mechanism of repetition, but the professionalism. The IWA team had waited for the exact position in the route where the terrain created the fewest escape angles. They had staged their attack to force a split. A forward team drawing attention, while the real strike came from the elevated position on the right. It was the kind of operation that went into training manuals, the kind that instructors described as a textbook example of high ground exploitation. Naruto identified the setup about 3 seconds before it activated. 3 seconds was not enough. He got one of the squad members out of the initial strike zone. He got a second one to cover. He was dealing with the forward team, containing them, driving them back, the controlled brutality of someone operating at the level he needed. When the elevated strike hit, it hit Daisuke, not fatally. Not immediately. He took the hit, a technique Naruto didn't fully register in the speed of the moment, and went down in a way that his body said was serious before his expression caught up. He was conscious. He was talking, or trying to. He was 15 years old and silver-haired, and he had asked 23 questions during his processing and left dried fruit without a note, and he was on the ground and the medic was 20 minutes away. Naruto cleared the remaining threat in a time he did not afterward remember clearly. He was beside Daisuke before the echoes settled. The wound was in his side, a precision strike, internal damage, the kind that a field medic could manage if the field medic was there, and the patient was stable and the stars were arranged correctly. Naruto knew the first aid. He knew the chakra stabilization technique Rin had shown him during one of their morning conversations, basic life maintenance, buying time for proper treatment. He applied it. Daisuke looked up at him. His expression was the serious one, the usual one, but underneath it something surprised and quietly frightened that he was working very hard to manage. "Is it bad?" he asked. Naruto kept his voice even, kept his hands steady. "I've seen worse." He had also seen worse go both ways. "The medic is coming." "Hold on. I'm holding." A pause. Something worked through his face. "The elevated position. I should have identified it earlier." "Stop. I had the angle and I didn't." "Stop," Naruto said. More firmly. "You did everything right. The setup was professional. It would have caught anyone." He pressed the stabilization technique more carefully along the damage. "Don't use energy talking." Daisuke was quiet for a moment. "There's dried persimmon in my left chest pocket," he said. "From the last supplemental, Daisuke. I was going to give it to you later." "For the questions." His voice was getting quieter in a way that had nothing to do with volume. I didn't get to. A pause. Take it now, Naruto said. I'll take it later. When Rin has you fixed. Daisuke nodded. He seemed to accept this as a reasonable arrangement. He died 43 minutes later, at the forward base, with Rin present and everything that could have been done being done. The persimmon was still in his chest pocket. Naruto took it afterward. When everyone had stepped away and the space had gone quiet in the specific way that spaces go quiet after a death, when the only sound was the wind off the rock formations and his own breathing. He took it out of the pocket and held it in his hand and looked at it. It was a small, dried persimmon in a square of paper. The kind that came in supplemental ration packages, dense and sweet, the kind nobody particularly liked and everybody ate when there was nothing better. He sat down on the ground outside the medical tent and held it. He sat there for a long time. The camp was quiet when Kushina found him. He moved from the medical tent. At some point, he couldn't say when, to the eastern perimeter, the edge where the rock formations gave way to a long view of the valley below. There was no sentry posting here. The angle made it tactically irrelevant. Just open ground and a long view in the stars, which were very bright at this altitude on a clear night. He was sitting with his back against the outermost rock formation, his knees pulled to his chest, the paper-wrapped persimmon still in his hand. He heard her footsteps. Didn't look up. She sat down beside him. Not across, beside, the same way she'd sat beside him on the rock after the dawn offensive. Close enough to share warmth in the cold. She looked at the valley, not at him, and didn't speak for a while. He was grateful for that. Rin told me about the persimmon, she said eventually. He turned it over in his hand. She said you've been sitting here for 2 hours. A pause. I told her I'd give you 2 more and then come find you. I'm fine. I know you're fine. Fine doesn't preclude company. She said it practically, the way she said most things. I lost someone last month. Wataru. The 17-year-old I mentioned. He looked at her then. She was looking at the valley, the long dark spread of it, the distant shadow of the hills. Her hair was down tonight. She'd undone the braid at some point in the evening hours, and it lay across her shoulders in a quiet red mass. After it happened, she said, I sat in the equipment storage for 4 hours. Alone. Nobody bothered me because I think they were afraid of what I'd do if they tried. She paused. Minato brought me tea at the end. He didn't say anything. He just put the tea down and sat on a supply crate and waited until I was ready to get up. That sounds like him, Naruto said, without thinking. She glanced at him. He held still. It does, she said. Yes. She returned to the valley. I'm not bringing you tea. I left it in the tent, and the walk seemed too far. Something loosened very slightly in his chest. I don't really like tea. No one here likes the tea. It's horrible. Rinji has been complaining about it for 3 weeks. She shifted slightly, settling her back more comfortably against the rock. Tell me about him, Daisuke. Yes. He thought about where to begin. He thought about 23 questions during processing and dried fruit without a note, and you answer what you mean. He was 15, Naruto said. He'd have been extraordinary by 20. How do you know? Because I know what extraordinary looks like at 15. He looked at his hands. He reminded me of someone. Someone I knew. Someone who was shaped by this war and came out the other side of it changed but still himself, underneath everything it took from him. He paused. Daisuke would have done the same. She was quiet. It's different, he said, when they're young. It's always different, she said. Every time it's the only time. He looked at her. She met his eyes briefly. Something direct and clear and sad in hers, the acknowledged sadness of someone who had learned not to push it away. I used to think it would get easier, she said. The people who've been doing this longer. I thought they knew some trick to it. Some way of carrying it that I hadn't learned yet. She shook her head slightly. They don't. They're just carrying more. He thought about Kakashi at 26, 30, 32, carrying Obito and Rin and Minato and the layered accumulated weight of all of it, wearing a mask over the bottom half of his face as if physical concealment could do what emotional concealment couldn't. He thought about the specific exhaustion of that, not the kind sleep fixed, the kind that became its own companion. They are, Naruto said. Just carrying more. She nodded. Looked at the valley. Where is he? He asked. Your person who died. Wataru, buried at the base perimeter. There's a small section, she paused. All of them are there. The ones we've lost here. A beat. He's next to Hisami. They never met, really. She died 3 hours before he did, different points in the same ambush. But they're together now, and I think he would have liked her. She was funny. She stopped. I think about whether they would have liked each other sometimes. The people I've lost. Whether in some other version of things they'd have sat together at a table and argued about something ordinary. He thought about Jiraiya and Asuma and Niji, gone from his own time, each in their specific irrevocable way. He thought about whether they'd have liked each other. He thought about a table somewhere in some version of things and all of them at it, arguing about something ordinary. Yeah, he said, rough around the edges. I do that too. She looked at him. Really looked, the full attention look that she reserved for things she was deciding how to hold. You've lost people, she said. More than you should have, at your age. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. Who? He was quiet for a moment. Then a teacher. My teacher's teacher. A classmate who deserved better. A man who could have been my enemy but chose not to be. He paused. Others. She received each of these without reaction except the quality of her listening, full and steady, and without any impulse to rush him towards something more manageable. How old were you? She asked. The first one, 12. He thought of Zabuza and Haku, who were complicated in his history and had mattered more than he'd had language for at the time. 13, for the first one that I really understood the shape of. He thought of Jiraiya. He looked at his hands. 51. My teacher. He was 51. A pause. He died the way he lived, completely himself. I didn't. I was somewhere else. I found out afterward. She said nothing. She let the sentence exist at its actual size. I carry it still, he said. All of them. Differently. They sit in different places, take up different amounts of room at different times. But I carry them. He opened his hand and looked at the persimmon. Daisuke is there now. He's just arrived. She looked at the persimmon. He left it for you, she said. He was going to give it later. He folded his fingers back over it. I told him later. When Rin had him fixed. Silence. He knew, she said softly. Children like him know. They understand the situation better than we wish they did. She paused. That's not a comfort. It's just true. No, he said. It's not a comfort. The night around them was very still. The valley below was dark and empty. The stars were the same stars he'd looked at in his own time. The same ancient configuration, unchanged across 15 years, the one continuous thing. You're from somewhere with more stars, she said. He blinked. What? You look at the sky like you're used to more of them. Like ours is a reduced version. She glanced up briefly. Or fewer buildings. Somewhere with a clear horizon. He thought of the clearing outside Konoha's eastern gate where he used to train. The view of the sky from there, uninterrupted, on clear nights so full of stars it was almost uncomfortable. Somewhere with a clear horizon, he said. Yes, me too. She looked up for a moment. Yuzushio was on the ocean. The sky was endless. You couldn't see where it stopped. A pause. I was 6 when we left. I remember the sky more clearly than I remember anything else about the place. She brought her eyes back down. That's probably what they meant for me to remember. He looked at her profile. The long line of her nose. The way she held her chin, not defensively, not aggressively, just present, a person who was fully in whatever moment she occupied. She was 6 when Yuzushio burned. She had grown up in Konoha as the last of her people. The container for something she hadn't asked to contain, an outsider in a village that was supposed to be a home, carrying the weight of a lost country and the specific loneliness of being the only one who remembered what it felt like. His whole life, he had been the same shape of thing. He had never been able to say that to anyone who understood it from the inside. I know what that is, he said. Growing up as the last of something. She turned to look at him. I grew up not knowing why I was alone, he said carefully. Not understanding why I was separate from the people around me. The other children, the adults in the village. He chose words that were true and limited, true and approximate. I had a reason. I just didn't know the reason for a long time. What was the reason? He met her eyes. I was carrying something that the village knew about and I didn't. That made me different to them. Before I understood why, she looked at him steadily. The longevity chakra, she said, and she wasn't quite asking. Something like that, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her processing the things he'd given her, the fragments, the outline of a shape she didn't have all the edges to, the suggestion of a story she couldn't fully read yet. But someone told you eventually, she said. He thought of the night in the memory space, when his father had appeared and given him what he needed, when his mother had rushed out of the fox's chakra like a tide coming in, and held him and said my sunshine, and the word had landed in some hollow place, and filled it. Someone told me eventually, he said. She nodded slowly. She seemed to decide something. When I was brought to Konoha, she said, I didn't speak for 2 months. She said it without particular emotion, historical, factual. Not because I was traumatized. I spoke Yuzu dialect predominantly, and the Konoha dialect has different rhythms, and I refused to speak until I could do it correctly. I was 6 years old, and I had decided that if I was going to be somewhere new, I was going to be there correctly, or not at all. A pause. The children thought I was broken. The adults thought I was difficult. She tilted her head slightly. I was both, probably. That sounds right, he said, and she shot him a look that contained amusement and mild offense in equal parts. I mean, it sounds consistent. With what? With someone who does everything completely or not at all. She considered this. That's fair, she allowed. I've been told it's a character flaw. I've been told the same thing about the same tendency, he said. I don't think it's a flaw. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, not a large thing, but something that had been held at a certain distance, moved slightly closer. What do you think it is? She asked. He thought about it genuinely. I think it's a consequence of being the last of something. When you're the last one, there's no one to maintain the thing for you. You have to maintain it yourself, completely, or it disappears. He paused. So you do things completely? Because halfway is the same as not at all. She was very still. Yes, she said. Quietly. That's it exactly. They sat with that for a moment. The specific silence of two people who have found the same frequency and are adjusting to the resonance. You're strange, Naruto Uzumaki, she said. But she said it the way she'd said it the last time, like something she'd moved from the concerning column to the interesting one, and didn't need to reclassify anymore. You've said that. It keeps being true. She shifted, and her shoulder was against his, warm and real and present in the cold night. Not accidental, not incidental. Deliberate, in the way everything she did was deliberate. He didn't move away. They sat like that, her shoulder against his, the valley below, the stars above, the persimmon in his closed hand, until sometime well past midnight, until the cold deepened past the point where sitting outside was reasonable, until the stars had shifted noticeably in their slow rotation. She fell asleep against his shoulder at some point. He knew the moment it happened, felt the specific change in her weight as the wakefulness left her, the way her head tipped slightly and the tension went out of her neck. She'd done what he'd observed she did, decided to sleep and slept, immediately and completely. He stayed still. He let her sleep. He sat in the cold dark and held the persimmon and looked at the stars and thought about Daisuke and Jiraiya and Asuma and Niji and all the people he carried and the people she would carry and the people she already carried and the 6-year-old child who had refused to speak until she could do it correctly, in a new country, in the ruins of a world, with the entire ocean behind her and nothing ahead but the work. He thought, she deserved so much more than what she got. He thought, she got more than she knew. He thought, the stone in the Hokage grounds with her name on it is in a village full of people who were saved by what she chose to do, and they go to it, and they bring flowers and they stand in the rain with their heads bowed, all of them, from the oldest to the ones born after it was over, because what she did is the kind of thing that doesn't fit in a grave. The stars moved their slow inch. She slept. He thought, I am not going to recover from this. And it was not a distressed thought, exactly. It was the kind of thought you had when you had already accepted the loss and were sitting in the remaining warmth, deciding to feel it fully instead of preparing for the cold. He was the last thing, always. He had learned, slowly, imperfectly, but he had learned, that the last thing was also the continuation. The spiral went inward and then it came back out. That was what spirals did. He was here. She was here. The stars were the same. For tonight that was enough. She woke exactly at dawn, her eyes opening at the first pale edge of light as if she'd set an alarm, and was upright before he could give any indication of whether he'd slept. He had not slept. She looked at him. He looked back. "You stayed up," she said. "I was fine." She made a sound that was not quite exasperation and not quite concern and occupied the specific territory between them. Then she stood, rolled her shoulders, shook the cold out of her hands. "Rin is going to have thoughts about your sleep schedule," she said. "Rin has thoughts about everyone's sleep schedule." "Fair." She looked at him one more time, the full attention look, early morning, unguarded in the way people were before the day assembled its armor. "Are you okay?" He turned the persimmon over in his hand one more time. Then he put it in his jacket pocket, the inner one close. "I will be," he said. She nodded. She accepted the difference between okay and will be without requiring him to close the gap. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. He took it. She pulled him to his feet. Practical, strong, not making anything of the moment except exactly what it was. She didn't release his hand immediately. She held it for one breath, two, the grip solid and warm. Then she let go. "Come on," she said. "There's work." There was work. He walked back into the camp behind her, in the pale early light, and the valley was still there and the stars were fading and Daisuke was gone and the persimmon was in his pocket, and she was ahead of him. Red hair in the morning, alive. There was always work. He went to do it.